The day started like any other for Elon Musk. He sat in the sunlit corner of his office at SpaceX, surrounded by whiteboards scrawled with equations and sketches of rockets destined for Mars. His mind raced through a million calculations, decisions, and ideas as he worked on perfecting the next iteration of the Starship. But then, something unexpected happened. A nondescript envelope, unlike the usual barrage of emails and digital notifications, appeared on his desk. Its arrival was peculiar. No assistant had mentioned it, no security team had flagged it. It bore no logo or address, just his name written in impeccable calligraphy. Curious, Elon tore it open. Inside was a single card embossed with elegant silver lettering. You are cordially invited to meet the next generation of visionaries. Come, if you dare to challenge the future. Beneath the message was a set of coordinates and a date, just 2 days away. He furrowed his brow, rereading the card. There was no sender's name, no organization. It reeked of mystery. His instinct was to dismiss it as a prank or an overly elaborate marketing ploy, but something about the wording gnawed at his curiosity. The next generation of visionaries? Elon muttered, tapping the card against the desk. What future are they challenging? Later that evening, he mentioned it to Gwen Shotwell, SpaceX's president. Could be a hoax, she said, sipping her coffee. But honestly, Elon, it's not like you to back down from a challenge. Her words echoed in his mind long after she left. Elon had faced countless challenges before, governments, competitors, even physics itself. This felt different. It wasn't just about technology. It felt personal. 2 days later, against the advice of his security team, Elon found himself in a Tesla Model X, following the GPS to a location deep in the Californian wilderness. The paved roads gave way to dirt paths, winding through towering redwoods. He drove until the trees parted, revealing a sleek, futuristic building that looked like it had been plucked from one of his own architectural sketches. As he stepped out of the car, the air buzzed with energy. The building's glass facade reflected the late afternoon sunlight, casting shimmering patterns on the ground. A young woman, no older than 20, greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. Musk," she said with a warm smile, "we've been expecting you." Her tone was calm, confident. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence far beyond her years. "Who's we?" Elon asked, his curiosity piqued. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she gestured toward a set of double doors that slid open with a soft hiss. "Please, follow me. Everything will be explained inside." Elon hesitated for a brief moment, but his curiosity outweighed his caution. As he stepped inside, he entered a world that would challenge not just his intellect but his very perception of what it meant to lead the future. As Elon stepped into the building, his mind flashed back to the journey that had brought him here. A journey marked by bold risks, relentless ambition, and countless moments of doubt. He had always been a misfit. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, he was the kid who buried himself in books about space, physics, and computer programming while his peers played rugby. The son of a stern engineer and a fiercely independent mother, Elon's world was shaped by a deep desire to escape. Escape his circumstances, escape the ordinary, escape the limitations others seemed content to accept. His path was never easy. At age 12, he coded and sold his first video game, Blaster, an early hint of his knack for problem-solving. But school was brutal. He was bullied relentlessly, often leaving him bruised and battered, physically and emotionally. Those experiences hardened him, teaching him that the world didn't know him kindness. In his early 20s, he left South Africa for North America, seeking freedom and opportunity. Canada gave him a taste of independence, but it was the United States, with its promise of unbounded innovation, that captured his imagination. He attended the University of Pennsylvania, double majoring in physics and economics, then headed to Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. His first venture, Zip2, was a modest success, providing city guides for newspapers. It earned him millions, but his ambitions were far greater. He poured his earnings into X.com, an online banking startup that would eventually evolve into PayPal. When eBay acquired it, Musk became a multimillionaire overnight. Yet even then, he wasn't satisfied. Elon's true aspirations lay beyond Earth. Space had always fascinated him. Its vastness, its mystery, its promise of a fresh start for humanity. But when he looked at NASA's progress, he saw stagnation. Private aerospace companies were non-existent or overly cautious. So, he did the unthinkable. He founded SpaceX. Everyone called him crazy. Rockets are for governments, not entrepreneurs, critics scoffed. His early launches were catastrophic failures, with rockets exploding on the pad or crashing into the ocean. Each failure drained his funds, his energy, and his confidence. By 2008, SpaceX was on the brink of collapse. Tesla, his electric car venture, was also struggling to survive, and his solar company, SolarCity, was bleeding money. Musk poured his entire fortune into saving them, even borrowing from friends to pay rent. The media called him reckless. His employees whispered that he was driving himself into the ground. But Elon refused to give up. In his mind, the stakes were too high. SpaceX's success wasn't just about building rockets. It was about securing humanity's future as a multiplanetary species. Tesla wasn't just about selling cars. It was about ending humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. Then, a miracle happened. SpaceX's fourth launch succeeded, putting a satellite into orbit and securing a critical NASA contract. Tesla unveiled the Roadster, proving electric cars could be fast, sleek, and desirable. The tide began to turn. By 2023, Elon Musk had become a household name. He was the man behind reusable rockets, self-driving cars, and brain-machine interfaces. But fame came with its own challenges. Critics questioned his work ethic, his blunt personality, and his sometimes controversial tweets. His personal relationships often suffered, and his children saw less of him than he wished. Yet through it all, Elon remained laser-focused on his ultimate goals. Now, as he followed the young woman deeper into the mysterious facility, he couldn't help but wonder if the struggles and triumphs of his life had prepared him for what lay ahead. They entered a spacious hall, its walls lined with holographic displays of planets, neural networks, and complex algorithms. A group of teenagers and young adults stood in clusters, their conversations a blend of languages and technical jargon that Elon only partially understood. "Welcome to the Nexus," the young woman said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "This is where the brightest minds of the next generation come together to rewrite the future." Elon scanned the room. Some faces were familiar. Child prodigies he'd read about in magazines, young geniuses who had made headlines for solving problems even seasoned scientists couldn't crack. Others were complete enigmas, their presence shrouded in mystery. And then, he saw her. A young woman, perhaps 17 or 18, stood apart from the crowd. Her piercing green eyes locked onto his, unblinking and intense. She exuded a quiet confidence that was both unsettling and intriguing. "That's Cassandra," the woman guiding him said, noticing his gaze. "She's one of the brightest here, and also your harshest critic." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Critic? Of what?" "Everything you stand for," she replied with a wry smile. Before he could respond, Cassandra began walking toward him, her steps deliberate and her expression unreadable. Elon Musk had faced countless challenges in his life, but as Cassandra approached, he felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping over him. Was it doubt? The hall buzzed with a strange mix of energy, the hum of advanced technology, the chatter of young minds exchanging ideas, and the unmistakable tension that comes with the meeting of great intellects. Elon Musk stood amidst it all, scanning the room with a curious intensity. These were no ordinary young people. As Cassandra reached him, her gaze sharp and probing, Elon felt the room quieting around them. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice even and calm, "you've built your empire on the premise that humanity's survival depends on reaching the stars. But have you ever stopped to question if that premise is flawed?" Her directness caught him off guard. Most people approached him with deference, but Cassandra was different. "I'm always open to questioning assumptions," Elon replied, meeting her stare. "That's how progress is made. But the evidence is clear. Earth won't sustain us forever. Mars is a backup plan." "A flawed one," she said quickly. "You focus on escaping Earth's problems rather than solving them. What if the resources you're using to build rockets could instead rebuild ecosystems, create sustainable cities, or..." Ensure we're not wiped out by a global catastrophe? Elon interrupted. His tone was calm but firm. One asteroid, one supervolcano, one runaway AI. Humanity's entire future can't hinge on one planet. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Around them, the other prodigies watched in silence, their expressions ranging from awe to apprehension. Before the tension could escalate further, the young woman who had guided Elon into the hall stepped between them. Okay, she said, raising her hands as if to break up a fight. Let's save the philosophical debates for later, shall we? For now, Mr. Musk, meet the team. She gestured toward the group of prodigies. Elon Musk, this is Project Nexus, a collective of the world's brightest young minds. Everyone here has been selected for their unique contributions to science, technology, and philosophy. Together, we aim to reshape humanity's trajectory. Elon turned his attention to the group. There was Ethan, a 14-year-old physicist who had developed a groundbreaking theory on quantum gravity. Next to him stood Ava, a 16-year-old geneticist working on a revolutionary method to cure hereditary diseases. Beside her was Ravi, a mathematician whose algorithms were already being used in predictive modeling for global climate change. Each of them had a story, a reason for being here. But what struck Elon was the look in their eyes, a mix of youthful ambition and the kind of wisdom that usually came with age. You've assembled an impressive group, Elon said, nodding toward the young woman. She smiled. It wasn't me. We found each other. The real question is, why are you here? Before Elon could respond, a hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. It displayed a 3D model of Earth, spinning slowly. Data streams scrolled alongside it, graphs of rising temperatures, dwindling resources, population growth. The projections painted a bleak picture of the planet's future. This, Cassandra said, stepping forward, is why you're here. The hologram shifted, now showing a side-by-side comparison. One Earth, lush and thriving, and another, barren and lifeless. We stand at a crossroads, she continued. And while your vision has inspired millions, some of us believe it's incomplete. The truth is, you're not the only one who can shape humanity's future. That's why we invited you, to challenge your ideas and see if they can stand against ours. Elon raised an eyebrow. You invited me here to argue? To collaborate, Cassandra corrected. But first, we need to see if you're willing to listen. The prodigies nodded in agreement, their expressions serious. Let me guess, Elon said, a slight smirk forming on his lips. There's a series of tests or challenges I have to pass? Cassandra smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. Before Elon could probe further, the lights dimmed, and the room transformed. Walls slid away to reveal multiple smaller chambers, each one filled with complex machinery, puzzles, and simulations. You'll face 3 trials, Cassandra explained, each one designed to test not just your intellect, but your ability to adapt, collaborate, and see beyond your own perspective. Elon crossed his arms, intrigued. And if I fail? Then maybe, she said, it's time for you to step aside and let the next generation lead. The challenge was clear, and the stakes had never felt higher. The room where Elon stood transformed before his eyes. The hologram of Earth dissolved, replaced by a sprawling, 3-dimensional maze that appeared to stretch infinitely in every direction. The walls of the maze glowed faintly, pulsating with energy. Cassandra stood beside Elon, holding a small device resembling a smartwatch. Your first trial is called the Labyrinth of Collaboration, she said. This is a simulation designed to test your ability to work with others under pressure. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how well you lead and listen. Elon studied the maze. What's the objective? Reach the center, she replied simply. But you can't do it alone. The young prodigies, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. Ethan, the teenage physicist, adjusted his glasses. Ava, the geneticist, tied her hair into a ponytail, her expression serious. Ravi, the mathematician, looked at Elon with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Cassandra handed each of them a similar smartwatch device. Each of you will have a piece of the puzzle. Only by working together will you find the path to the center. Elon strapped the device onto his wrist, its interface lighting up immediately. It displayed a map fragment, just a small corner of the maze. "Looks like I'll need more pieces to get the full picture," he said, glancing at the others. "Exactly," Cassandra said. "The maze will shift every 5 minutes. If you rely only on yourself, you'll never make it. Ready?" Elon nodded, and so did the Prodigies. "Good," Cassandra said. She pressed a button, and the maze shimmered. The floor beneath them shifted, splitting into separate paths. Within moments, Elon and the others were scattered across the labyrinth. Elon found himself in a narrow corridor, its glowing walls illuminating his way. The smartwatch buzzed, displaying a cryptic symbol, a triangle within a circle. His mind raced. Was it a clue, or just a marker? "Team, can anyone hear me?" he called out. A crackle of static answered, followed by Ava's voice. "I hear you, Mr. Musk. My watch shows an arrow pointing west. Any idea what it means?" "I've got a symbol, a triangle in a circle," Elon replied. "It might correspond to your direction." Ravi's voice cut in. "I'm seeing numbers. Looks like coordinates. X equals 12, Y equals 7. Does that help anyone?" "Hold on," Ethan said. "I think these are pieces of a larger algorithm. If we combine the coordinates, directions, and symbols, we might decode the path." Elon smiled despite the situation. "Ethan, start mapping the algorithm. Ava, head west and see if you encounter a junction. Ravi, keep feeding us coordinates. I'll try to find more symbols to match with your data." The team moved quickly, exchanging information through their devices. Every few minutes, the maze shifted, its walls sliding seamlessly into new configurations. It was disorienting, but Elon kept his focus, synthesizing the data and adapting to the changes. An hour later, the group reconvened at what appeared to be the maze's midpoint. They stood in a circular chamber, its walls covered in glowing symbols. At the center was a pedestal with 5 slots, each shaped like one of the watches they wore. "We made it this far," Ava said, her voice tinged with relief. "But we're not done yet," Elon noted. He pointed to the slots. "I'm guessing we need to sync our devices to unlock the path to the center." As they placed their watches into the slots, the room trembled. A low hum filled the air as the maze walls dissolved, revealing a single, direct path to the heart of the labyrinth. "Congratulations," Cassandra's voice echoed from unseen speakers. "You've completed the first trial. But remember, this was the easiest one." Elon glanced at the Prodigies. They were exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time, he felt a genuine connection with them, not as rivals, but as collaborators. Cassandra appeared at the far end of the path, her expression unreadable. "You've proven you can work as a team. The next trial will test something deeper." "What's next?" Elon asked, his curiosity piqued. She smiled faintly. "We'll see if you're ready to confront your own limitations." The room beyond the labyrinth was starkly different. Gone were the glowing walls and high-tech displays. Instead, Elon and the Prodigies stepped into what felt like a vast, endless void. The ground beneath their feet was smooth and reflective, like a giant mirror. Above them, there was nothing but darkness, save for a dim, eerie light emanating from no discernible source. Cassandra stood in the center of the space, waiting for them. Her calm demeanor betrayed none of the intensity of what was to come. "Welcome to the second trial," she said. "This is the mirror of limitations. Here, you'll face not external challenges, but the internal ones, the doubts, fears, and flaws that hold you back." Elon crossed his arms, his skepticism evident. "And how, exactly, do we face our limitations in a room full of mirrors?" Cassandra smiled faintly. "The mirror is not a room. It's a state of mind. You'll see soon enough." Before anyone could respond, the reflective surface beneath their feet shimmered. The ground seemed to melt away, leaving each of them standing alone, surrounded by their own reflections. The Prodigies disappeared from Elon's sight, and an oppressive silence filled the air. Elon found himself standing in an endless corridor of mirrors. Each one showed a different version of himself, some familiar, others distorted and strange. In one mirror, he saw himself as a child, huddled in a corner while older boys taunted him. The pain and isolation were palpable, a stark reminder of the bullying he endured in his youth. In another, he was surrounded by rockets and electric cars, but he was utterly alone. His face was lined with exhaustion, his eyes hollow. The image whispered of the sacrifices he'd made. Time with his children, failed relationships, and the toll of relentless ambition. A third mirror showed a catastrophic failure. A rocket exploding midair, a Tesla factory shut down, and investors abandoning him. This version of himself looked broken, defeated. "You've always feared failure," a voice echoed around him. It was his own voice, but darker, colder. "You tell the world it's part of the process, but deep down, you can't stand the thought of losing." Elon clenched his fists. "Failure is a step toward success. I've proven that." "Have you?" the voice countered. "Or have you just been lucky? How many more risks can you take before everything collapses?" The mirrors shifted again, revealing an image of Elon standing on Mars, triumphant. But as he watched, the red planet began to crumble. The domed colonies collapsed, the atmosphere faded, and the screen filled with lifeless dust. "Even your greatest dream could fail," the voice said. "And when it does, what will you have left?" Elon's jaw tightened. "I won't let it fail." "But you can't control everything," the voice whispered. "That's your greatest flaw. You think you can." Meanwhile, the Prodigies faced their own mirrors. Ava saw herself in a lab, surrounded by medical breakthroughs. But every patient she tried to save disappeared before her eyes. The weight of her ambition, of the lives she couldn't save, pressed heavily on her chest. Ravi faced a chalkboard filled with equations. As he solved each one, more appeared, faster and faster, until he was overwhelmed. He realized his fear wasn't failure, but irrelevance, that his work might never make the impact he dreamed of. Ethan stood before a version of himself older and jaded, surrounded by stacks of unfinished papers. His younger self whispered, "You'll burn out before you make a difference." As the visions pressed on, Elon focused on the reflections around him. His breathing steadied, and his mind sharpened. He'd faced doubts before. "Enough," he said aloud. The corridor of mirrors rippled, and Cassandra's voice replaced his darker thoughts. "Understanding your limitations doesn't make you weak, Elon. It makes you human. The question is, can you accept them and move forward?" Elon paused, his gaze fixed on the crumbling Mars colony. Slowly, he nodded. "I accept that failure is possible, but it won't stop me from trying." The mirrors shattered, their fragments dissolving into the air. Elon found himself back in the void, the Prodigies reappearing around him. Each looked shaken but resolute. Cassandra stood before them, her expression softer now. "You've passed the second trial. You've faced your fears, your doubts, your flaws. But the greatest challenge is yet to come." "What's next?" Elon asked, his voice steadier than before. Cassandra's eyes glimmered with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "The next trial isn't about who you are, but about who you trust and what you're willing to sacrifice." The reflective void gave way to a new environment, a large, circular chamber with a domed ceiling that seemed impossibly high. At its center was a massive machine, its intricate mechanisms whirring softly. The walls were lined with glowing panels displaying equations, diagrams, and news headlines detailing humanity's greatest crises: climate change, famine, resource scarcity. Cassandra stood near the machine, her demeanor serious. "Welcome to the third trial. This is the trial of trust and sacrifice." Elon stepped forward, studying the machine. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, as though it were alive. "And what does this one test?" Cassandra gestured toward the machine. "This is the Nexus Decision Matrix. It's a simulation of humanity's most critical dilemma: survival at a cost. You'll have to make a choice, Mr. Musk. But here's the twist: you won't make it alone. Your success depends on trusting others and weighing the greater good against personal sacrifice." Elon looked at the Prodigies, who were already examining the machine with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. "Explain the scenario," he said. Cassandra pressed a button on a nearby console, and the machine projected a hologram of Earth. A voice, cold and mechanical, began to speak. Scenario: a global crisis threatens the survival of humanity. Resources are dwindling, and a decision must be made to allocate remaining reserves. You have two options. 1. Focus resources on immediate survival, preserving a select group of people for rebuilding civilization. 2. Invest in long-term solutions, risking short-term losses but potentially saving the entire population. The voice paused, then added, "Participants must reach a unanimous decision. Disagreement will result in failure." Elon's brow furrowed. "And what happens if we fail?" Cassandra's expression was grave. "In this simulation, you walk away with a bruised ego. But in reality, failure would mean extinction." The group gathered around the machine, each of them silent as the weight of the scenario settled in. Ethan was the first to speak. Option 1 is the safer choice. Fewer people survive, but it guarantees some form of future. Ava frowned. "But it's morally wrong to sacrifice billions for the sake of a few." Option 2 might be riskier, but it's the only choice that values everyone equally. Ravi interjected, his voice measured. "We need to think strategically. Long-term solutions sound ideal, but what if the risk is too high? What if we gamble and lose everything?" The debate quickly grew heated. Ethan's logic clashed with Ava's idealism, while Ravi tried to mediate. Elon stood apart, listening intently. Finally, he raised a hand, silencing the group. "We need to approach this differently. This isn't just a math problem, it's a test of trust." "Trust?" Ava asked, puzzled. Elon nodded. "The machine said the decision has to be unanimous. That means we can't solve this as individuals. We have to agree, and that means trusting each other's perspectives." Cassandra's voice echoed through the chamber. "Good insight, Mr. Musk. But insight alone won't carry you through. Make your decision." The group fell into a tense silence. Elon turned to Ava. "Why do you believe so strongly in option 2? She hesitated, then said, "Because I've spent my life trying to save lives, not prioritize some over others. If we don't try to save everyone, what's the point of anything we do?" Elon nodded, then looked at Ethan. "And why option 1? Ethan's gaze was steady. "Because probability matters. If we lose everyone, no one gets a future. Sacrifices are hard, but they're necessary sometimes." Ravi chimed in. "Can't we find a compromise? Adjust the resource allocation to minimize losses while still planning for long-term survival?" Elon thought for a moment. "That's exactly what we'll propose. We'll choose option 2 but modify it to account for short-term needs. It's risky, but it's a risk we take together." The Prodigies exchanged uncertain glances, but slowly, they nodded in agreement. Elon stepped forward and placed his hand on the machine. The others followed suit, their hands overlapping on the glowing surface. "We choose option 2, Elon said firmly, "but with adjustments for immediate survival." The machine whirred louder, its mechanisms accelerating. The hologram of Earth shimmered, displaying new projections, some promising, others grim. Finally, the Nexus decision matrix fell silent, and a single word appeared on the screen. "Success." The chamber filled with a warm light, and Cassandra's voice returned. "Congratulations. You've passed the final trial." Relief washed over the group, but Elon remained thoughtful. Cassandra approached him, her expression unreadable. "What did you learn?" Elon looked at the Prodigies. "That the future isn't just about innovation or ambition. It's about collaboration and understanding that no one person has all the answers." She smiled faintly. "Exactly. Welcome to the real test, Mr. Musk. The test of what comes next." As the light from the Nexus decision matrix faded, the chamber transformed once more. Elon and the Prodigies found themselves in a dimly lit room that felt more ancient than futuristic. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and a large circular table dominated the center. Around it sat shadowy figures, their faces obscured by hoods, their presence radiating authority and mystery. Cassandra stood near the table, her calm demeanor unchanged. "You've passed the trials, but your journey isn't over. Now, you'll face the Shadow Council." "The Shadow Council?" Elon asked, his eyes narrowing as he studied the figures. Cassandra nodded. "They represent the unseen forces guiding humanity's future. Scientists, philosophers, strategists. each of them tasked with shaping decisions that affect billions. They've been watching your every move, Mr. Musk. Now, they'll judge if you're truly ready to take on the responsibility you seek. Elon crossed his arms. And if they decide I'm not? Cassandra's gaze was steady. Then your vision ends here. The figure at the head of the table spoke, their voice deep and resonant. Elon Musk, you've proven your intellect, your resilience, and your capacity to collaborate. But we must ask, what drives you? Is it ambition, ego, or something more? Elon met the figure's gaze, or at least the shadow where their face should have been. It's not about me, he said. It's about ensuring humanity has a future, on Earth, on Mars, and beyond. I don't care about recognition. I care about results. Another figure leaned forward, their voice sharper. Bold words. But your history suggests otherwise. You've built empires, yes, but at great personal cost, and sometimes at the cost of those around you. How do we trust that your vision won't come at humanity's expense? Elon's jaw tightened. He thought of the sacrifices he'd made. Missed birthdays, broken relationships, sleepless nights spent solving problems most people couldn't fathom. I've made mistakes, he admitted, but I've never stopped trying to do what's right. I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be. But I know one thing. Humanity's survival depends on action. I'm willing to take the risks others won't. The third figure, with a voice like a whisper of wind, spoke next. Your trials were not just tests. They were glimpses into the challenges you'll face. Collaboration, self-awareness, sacrifice. They're only the beginning. Are you prepared to shoulder the weight of decisions that may define our species' future? Elon glanced at the Prodigies. They were watching him closely, their expressions a mix of respect and expectation. He saw in them the next generation of thinkers, dreamers, and doers. I am, he said firmly, but I'm not doing this alone. The future isn't just about me. It's about everyone in this room and beyond. We move forward together, or we don't move at all. The room fell silent, the council members exchanging subtle nods. Finally, the head of the table spoke again. You've shown promise, Elon Musk, but understand this. The path ahead is fraught with uncertainty. Your vision is ambitious, but ambition alone is not enough. Prove to us that you can lead not with power, but with wisdom. And remember, the world will not always follow. You must inspire, not command. The council members stood as one, their shadows elongating before disappearing entirely. The room grew brighter, the stone walls dissolving into light. Cassandra approached Elon, a rare smile playing on her lips. You've earned their trust for now, but the real test lies beyond these walls. Are you ready? Elon took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on him. I've been ready my whole life. She gestured to a door that had appeared behind him, its surface gleaming like polished steel. Then step through and begin the next chapter of your journey. The Prodigies followed him to the door, their faith in him solidified through the trials. As Elon reached for the handle, he turned to them. This isn't just my journey anymore. It's ours. Let's make it count. With that, he pushed the door open, stepping into the unknown. The door swung open, revealing a breathtaking scene that seemed like a vision from the future. The group stood on a high platform overlooking a sprawling city unlike any they had ever seen. Towers of shimmering glass spiraled into the sky, their surfaces covered in greenery. Autonomous drones zipped between buildings, and sleek maglev trains glided silently along suspended tracks. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the smog-filled metropolises most of them knew. In the distance, solar arrays and wind farms stretched toward the horizon, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. This is New Eden, Cassandra said, stepping forward. A prototype city built by those who came before you, visionaries who believed in a sustainable future. Elon studied the city intently. Why haven't I heard of this? A place like this could inspire billions. Because it exists outside the public eye, Cassandra replied. It's a controlled experiment, meant to test the limits of human ingenuity and cooperation. Everything you see here was designed with one goal in mind: survival without compromise. Ava's eyes lit up as she spotted a nearby clinic with advanced biotechnological equipment. Ravi marveled at the energy systems, his mind already dissecting the engineering behind them. Ethan seemed fascinated by the city's governance system displayed on a holographic panel nearby. "This is incredible," Ava said. "Why isn't the whole world living like this?" Cassandra's expression darkened. "Because building a city like this requires sacrifices, resources, time, and unity. Qualities humanity often struggles to align. That's why you're here. To prove that a future like this can scale beyond these walls." The group was led to a sleek conference room at the top of a central tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New Eden, and a circular table awaited them, covered in holographic blueprints and data streams. Cassandra gestured to the table. "Your task is to evaluate New Eden's systems and decide which aspects can be implemented on a global scale. But beware, every decision comes with trade-offs. You'll need to balance technological ambition with the realities of politics, economics, and human behavior." Elon raised an eyebrow. "So, another trial?" "Not a trial," Cassandra corrected. "A collaboration. From this point on, you're no longer being tested. You're being trusted." For hours, the group delved into the intricacies of New Eden. Ava focused on the city's healthcare system, which combined AI diagnostics with personalized genetic treatments. "This could revolutionize medicine," she said, "but the costs would be astronomical." Ethan analyzed the governance model, which used blockchain technology to ensure transparency and accountability. "It's effective, but implementing this globally would require dismantling existing power structures. That's a battle we're not ready for." Ravi was absorbed in the energy systems. "The renewable infrastructure is brilliant, but the initial investment would bankrupt most nations." Elon listened to their insights, occasionally offering his own. He was impressed by their depth of knowledge and their ability to tackle complex problems. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. As night fell over New Eden, Cassandra returned to the conference room. "Have you reached any conclusions?" Elon looked at the Prodigies, then back at Cassandra. "The systems here are extraordinary, but they can't be implemented all at once. The world isn't ready for that kind of upheaval. We need a phased approach, starting with the technologies that address humanity's most urgent needs." "And what would those be?" Cassandra asked. "Energy and food security," Elon replied without hesitation. "If we can stabilize those, we'll create the foundation for everything else." Cassandra nodded, her expression approving. "A practical approach. But tell me, Elon, do you believe the world will follow your lead?" He smiled faintly. "They don't have to follow me. They just need to see that it's possible. Once they do, they'll create their own New Edens." As they prepared to leave New Eden, Cassandra handed Elon a small, data-encrypted tablet. "This contains everything you need to start the next phase of your journey. Use it wisely." Elon took the tablet, his mind already racing with possibilities. "This is just the beginning," he said, turning to the Prodigies. "The real work starts now." The group stepped into a transport pod, which began its descent back to the world they knew. As New Eden disappeared from view, the enormity of their mission settled over them. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Elon glanced at him, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to be. The future doesn't wait." The transport pod descended through the atmosphere, its sleek frame cutting through the air as it approached Earth. Outside the window, the sprawling cities of the world were visible, many choked by pollution, some standing in stark contrast with the pristine utopia of New Eden. The reality of their mission weighed heavily on Elon and the Prodigies as the distance between them and their destination grew shorter. "I never realized how much we've let slip through our fingers," Ravi said, his voice a mix of awe and concern. "New Eden was perfect. But this?" He gestured toward the chaos unfolding below them. "The gap is too wide." Elon remained silent, his gaze fixed ahead. He understood Ravi's words all too well. They were returning to a world that was in a state of disarray, battling climate crises, wealth inequality, and political discord. The challenges they faced were far greater than any engineering problem he'd solved. When the pod landed, the group disembarked into a bustling city that felt more grounded in reality than the future they just left behind. People hurried through the streets, each person wrapped up in their own lives, unaware of the global crossroads they stood at. As they walked through the city, Elon could feel the weight of their purpose. This wasn't just about technology or innovation. This was about shifting humanity's collective mindset. And that, he realized, would be the hardest part. "We need a plan," Elon said, breaking the silence. "A roadmap that brings the best of New Eden to the world, piece by piece." Ava nodded. "Agreed. But the question is, where do we start?" "Energy," Elon replied immediately. "It's the key to everything. If we can stabilize the world's energy resources, everything else follows. Without energy, we can't fix food security, healthcare, or climate change." Ethan chimed in. "We need to work with existing power structures. Trying to push through a global energy overhaul without their support will only backfire." "We'll need allies," Ravi added. "Governments, corporations, activists, everyone who has a stake in the future of the planet. It won't be easy to get them on board, but we need to show them why it matters." Elon stopped walking, his eyes focusing on a group of protesters gathered ahead. They were holding signs demanding action on climate change, their voices loud and passionate. "Sometimes, the people have more power than we give them credit for," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe this is where we begin. If we show them the path forward, they might just demand it from the powers that be." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and planning. Elon and the Prodigies worked tirelessly to develop a blueprint for global energy reform. They collaborated with scientists, engineers, and activists, trying to create a sustainable, decentralized energy grid that could be implemented worldwide. Their efforts were met with skepticism at first, but as their plan gained traction, more and more influential voices began to take notice. Governments offered initial support, while corporate giants saw the potential for profit in the new systems. Even the protesters they'd seen in the streets became allies, rallying behind the cause and pushing for policy changes. However, not all were convinced. Powerful industry players with vested interests in traditional energy systems fought back, employing their influence to stall progress and create roadblocks. The battle was far from over. But through it all, Elon remained focused. He knew that they were on the verge of something monumental. He'd faced obstacles before. This was just another challenge to overcome. One afternoon, as the team gathered in their makeshift war room, a message arrived from an unexpected source. An invitation to meet with world leaders at a summit focused on climate change and energy. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "We need to make this count," Elon said, pacing in front of the group. "This summit will be our chance to present our vision to the world's most influential decision-makers. If we fail here, everything we've worked for will be set back years." Ava's eyes were determined. "We've prepared for this. We know what needs to be done. Let's make sure they listen." Elon looked around at the Prodigies. They had grown in ways he hadn't expected. Where they once had questions, they now had answers. Answers that could change the course of humanity. "This is it," Elon said, his voice resolute. "Let's show them what's possible. Let's show them what we can build together." The day of the summit arrived. The world leaders sat in a grand hall, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. At the front of the room, Elon stood with the Prodigies beside him, ready to present their vision. As the lights dimmed, the first slide appeared. A model of a decentralized global energy system, powered by renewable resources, integrated with cutting-edge technologies like AI and blockchain for efficiency and transparency. Elon began, his voice steady but passionate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads. The world we know is at the brink of collapse. Our climate, our resources, our very future are in jeopardy. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the knowledge, the technology, and the drive to build something better. Something that will not only save our planet but set the foundation for a thriving future for all of humanity." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. The room was silent, the leaders listening intently. "We have already built a model for this future, a city where sustainability, innovation, and cooperation are not ideals, but reality. New Eden is more than a dream. It's a proof of concept. And now, we must bring it to the world." The presentation continued, showing how the proposed system could solve the world's most pressing problems, from energy scarcity to poverty, from political instability to climate change. When the final slide appeared, It was simple but powerful. Together, we can make this a reality. The applause at the summit was a tentative sound, polite but not overwhelming. Elon stood at the front of the room, his gaze scanning the faces of world leaders, experts, and journalists. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, weighing his words, his promises. He had expected some skepticism. What he hadn't anticipated was the palpable resistance that had already begun to take shape behind the scenes. As the summit concluded, the conversations began to fragment. Some leaders were intrigued by the proposal, intrigued by the possibility of a new world order. Others, particularly those with close ties to the traditional energy sectors, were not so easily swayed. "I think we've made our case," Ava said as they made their way back to the transport. "There's a lot of work to do, but we've planted the seed." Elon was less convinced. "We've done more than that. We've opened a door. But now, we need to keep it from closing." As the group left the building, they were approached by a delegation from the Global Energy Coalition, an organization comprised of multinational corporations, energy giants, and their allies in the political sphere. "Mr. Musk," one of the representatives said, extending a hand, "we'd like to have a private conversation with you about your proposal." Elon shook the hand, noting the coldness of the gesture. "Of course, but I warn you, my proposal doesn't come with compromises." The representative smiled, but there was little warmth in it. "We're not here to compromise, Mr. Musk. We're here to protect the future of energy." With that, the group was led into a private conference room. The conversation quickly turned tense. "We understand your vision," the representative began, sitting across from Elon. "But we've built the global energy infrastructure. We've created jobs, secured economies, and kept the world running. What you propose threatens that stability. The changes you're advocating for are risky, too risky for a world already on the brink." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Risky? You mean uncomfortable? Change is never easy, but it's necessary. You're clinging to an old system, one that's not only unsustainable but also dangerous." The representative's tone grew colder. "You misunderstand. We're not here to negotiate. We control the flow of energy across this planet. If you want your vision to succeed, you'll have to play by our rules." Elon leaned forward. "I'm not here to play by anyone's rules. I'm here to change them." There was a long silence as the room seemed to grow heavier. The representative's eyes darkened. "You'll soon realize, Mr. Musk, that you can't change the system from the outside. You'll either work with us, or you'll face consequences. And those consequences won't just affect you. They'll affect everyone who stands with you." As Elon left the meeting, the weight of those words lingered. The resistance was real, and it wasn't just ideological, it was personal. The energy giants had the power to shape the narrative, control the flow of information, and leverage their influence over governments. But he wasn't ready to back down. Back at their temporary headquarters, Elon convened a meeting with the Prodigies. He could see the concern in their eyes, but also the determination. "This isn't just about us anymore," Elon began. "We're up against powerful forces, forces that will stop at nothing to maintain the status quo. But we've got one thing they don't: the truth." Ava spoke first. "We need to be ready. The media will spin this as a battle between progress and stability, and the question will be who controls the narrative. We need to make sure the world knows what's at stake." Ravi nodded. "If we're going to win this, we need to bring everyone on our side. That means going beyond just governments and corporations. We need the people on our side. Activists, everyday citizens, people who believe in a better future." Ethan, always the strategist, added, "We need to build momentum. We'll create small victories, build trust, and then we can push the larger initiatives. It's about gaining support from the ground up." Elon looked around at the team, a renewed fire in his eyes. "We've already begun. We've shown them the vision. Now we need to make it impossible for them to ignore us." The weeks following the summit were filled with action. Elon and the Prodigies worked tirelessly to build a coalition of activists, scientists, and technologists who believed in their vision. They organized protests, demonstrations, and rallies that called for immediate action on climate change and energy reform. At the same time, they leveraged social media to amplify their message, creating viral content that spread awareness about the world's energy crisis and the urgent need for change. But the energy giants were quick to respond. They launched a counter-campaign that painted Elon and his team as radical disruptors who would destabilize economies and destroy jobs. The media was flooded with reports claiming that Musk's vision was unrealistic and dangerous, that it would lead to an economic collapse and the loss of millions of jobs. It was a battle of narratives, and the stakes had never been higher. Despite the backlash, the support for their cause continued to grow. The protests intensified, with people flooding the streets of major cities worldwide, demanding change. The pressure on world leaders mounted, and slowly, one by one, they began to come around. One evening, after a long day of strategy sessions, Elon stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. The lights below flickered, a reminder of how fragile the system truly was. He knew the fight was far from over, but the momentum was shifting in their favor. As the wind rustled through the air, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had spent so many years focusing on building things, rockets, electric cars, sustainable energy, but this was the real challenge. It wasn't just about technology. It was about changing the world's mindset, and he wasn't ready to back down. The battle for the future had reached a critical juncture. After months of protests, media campaigns, and behind-the-scenes negotiations, the situation had reached a tipping point. What had started as a passionate crusade for change had turned into a full-fledged movement, one that was capturing the world's attention. The world's energy giants were pushing back harder than ever, but the voice of the people had grown too loud to ignore. Elon sat at the conference table, surrounded by the Prodigies and a team of advisors. The latest reports showed a spike in global support for their vision. Public demonstrations had reached new heights, and social media platforms were flooded with hashtags, viral videos, and impassioned pleas for action. But with every victory came a counteroffensive from the entrenched powers, corporations and governments with deep ties to the existing energy structure. The stakes were higher than ever. "This is it," Elon said, his tone serious as he looked around the table. "We've gained momentum, but the real fight is just beginning. We need to push harder. We need to show the world that this can't just be another flash in the pan. This is a long-term commitment." Ava, always the pragmatic one, glanced at the numbers on the screen. "The pushback is growing. They're starting to hit us where it hurts. Public perception. We're being portrayed as reckless, as dreamers who don't understand the practical realities. We need to have a counter-strategy ready." Ethan, looking more pensive than usual, added, "It's a classic tactic. They'll keep trying to discredit us, to divide us. They'll make the narrative about us versus them, the disruptors versus the protectors of stability. But we need to make this bigger than just a battle over energy. We need to make this about the future of humanity." Ravi, always the voice of optimism, spoke up. "We've got the facts on our side. We know the science, the data, the solutions. The people are with us. The question is, how do we make sure this doesn't become a battle of egos but a movement for real change?" Elon leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "We keep pushing. We go to the people. We make this about their future, not ours. We make them feel like they have something to lose. People will rise up if they know they're fighting for something bigger than themselves. We need to give them that sense of urgency." The following weeks saw a new phase in their strategy. Elon and the Prodigies embarked on a global speaking tour, visiting cities where the protests had been most intense. They held town halls, rallies, and speeches, reaching out to everyday citizens and telling them what was at stake. They were no longer speaking to world leaders and CEOs. They were speaking to the hearts of the people. At one particularly emotional rally in a city plagued by pollution, Elon addressed a crowd of thousands. The air was thick with smog, and the streets were clogged with cars. "This," he said, gesturing to the skyline, "is not the future we want, but it is the future we're heading toward if we don't act now." The crowd was quiet, their eyes fixed on him. "We can do better. We can build a world where energy doesn't just power our homes. It powers our lives in a way that sustains the planet, that gives us all a future. But we need to do it together. We need everyone to rise up and demand that this change happens now." His words sent a ripple through the crowd. People began chanting, clapping, their voices growing louder as they called for immediate action. The movement had gained a momentum that was now unstoppable. Meanwhile, back at the summit of power, The energy giants were beginning to realize that their usual tactics were no longer enough. They had spent months trying to discredit Elon and his team, but the public pressure was mounting. Governments were starting to listen, not just out of concern for the planet, but out of fear of what would happen if they didn't act. The voice of the people was louder than ever, and it was becoming harder to ignore. A clandestine meeting was set up between the heads of the largest energy corporations. They convened in a private boardroom, their faces grim as they discussed their next move. "We've underestimated them," one of the executives said, his voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't just a few protesters anymore. It's a global movement, and it's growing every day. We need to take control of the narrative," another executive replied. "We need to make it clear that the future of energy is in safe hands, our hands. We can't let Musk and his team convince the world that they have the answers." "What do we do?" asked a third. "We can't just keep throwing money at this. The people are waking up." There was a long pause. Then, one of the leaders spoke. "We take the fight to them. We need to use our influence with the media and political allies. We need to discredit them in every way possible. We'll paint Musk and his team as dangerous radicals, people who are leading the world down a path of ruin." The room went silent as the weight of the plan settled in. The stakes had escalated. The battle for the future of the planet was now a battle of ideologies, and both sides knew that only one could come out on top. Back on the streets, however, the people were not backing down. The protests continued to grow, with new voices joining every day. Social media campaigns spread like wildfire, calling for governments to pass legislation that would bring the world's energy systems into the 21st century. Elon's team knew that this was a defining moment. "This is it," Elon said one night, standing before a massive rally in a city square. "The world is watching. What we do next will determine the future. We can't afford to let up. We must push harder than ever before." As the crowd roared in approval, Elon felt the weight of their trust and the fire of their determination. This was no longer just about technology or business. It was about saving the world. And nothing, not the energy giants, not the media campaigns, could stop them now. The movement was unstoppable. The world was waking up to a new reality, one that Elon Musk and his prodigies had worked tirelessly to create. Their vision for a sustainable, decentralized energy future was no longer just a dream. It had become a rallying cry for millions. And yet, as the movement swelled, so did the intensity of the opposition. Behind the scenes, the energy giants, feeling the walls closing in, began to escalate their efforts. They realized that the fight wasn't just over energy, it was a battle for global control. If they allowed Elon and his team to succeed, it would fundamentally alter the world order. They would not let that happen. Elon was aware that the stakes had grown higher, but he wasn't one to back down. His team, the Prodigies, had become a well-oiled machine. But even they felt the mounting pressure. The media onslaught, the political maneuvering, and the vast resources of the energy companies were beginning to have their impact. "Is it enough?" Ava asked one evening as she sat across from Elon, scrolling through the latest news reports. "We've got more support than ever, but the backlash is strong. They're attacking us from all angles, misinformation, discrediting our research, sowing division in the ranks. Are we really prepared for this?" Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "We knew it wouldn't be easy. The status quo isn't going to give up without a fight. But we can't let their fear of change determine our future. We have the people on our side, and we have the truth. We have to keep pushing forward, no matter what." Ravi nodded from the other side of the room. "The resistance is only going to get fiercer. We've already seen how they've used their power to manipulate public opinion, but we can't just keep reacting. We need to go on the offensive." Ethan, as always, was thinking several steps ahead. "We need a new strategy, a way to take control of the narrative before they spin it in their favor. We need to make sure the people stay on our side, and that means showing them the tangible benefits of the change we're fighting for." Elon stood up, pacing as he thought aloud. "It's not enough to show them the dangers of the old system. We need to give them something they can't ignore, something that makes the future we're building irresistible. We've been talking about it for months. A global energy revolution that's powered by the people." The team worked tirelessly for weeks to develop a new initiative, They would launch a global campaign, a movement within the movement, designed to showcase the immediate benefits of transitioning to sustainable energy. They would partner with cities and communities to implement renewable energy projects, demonstrating how these innovations could provide clean energy, create jobs, and revitalize local economies. At the same time, Elon and his prodigies knew that the fight for the narrative would continue to escalate. They had already seen how the media was being used against them, with reports painting them as radicals or worse. Now, they needed to take control of the story. They needed to make sure that the world saw them not as threats, but as the leaders of the future. The turning point came when a leaked report surfaced, a document revealing that the major energy corporations had been actively suppressing the development of alternative energy technologies for decades. The report detailed how these companies had spent billions to prevent progress in wind, solar, and geothermal energy in favor of maintaining their fossil fuel monopoly. The news spread like wildfire. The backlash against the energy giants was immediate and intense. The public, already on edge due to rising energy prices and environmental crises, saw the report as a betrayal. Trust in the energy industry plummeted, and for the first time, people were asking why these corporations had been blocking progress for so long. Elon seized the opportunity. "This is it," he said to his team. "This is the moment we take back the narrative. This is where we show the world that we've been right all along." They launched a media blitz, using the leaked report to highlight the stark contrast between their vision and the entrenched powers. They showcased stories of communities already benefiting from renewable energy, places that had switched to solar and wind power, reduced their carbon footprints, and created new local jobs. These stories were personal, powerful, and undeniable. "The truth is out there," Elon said in one of his public addresses. "The energy giants have been holding us back, and they've been doing it for decades. But now, we have the chance to change the game. We have the chance to build a world where energy is clean, accessible, and sustainable for everyone. And we're going to make it happen." The response was overwhelming. Protests erupted in cities across the globe, but this time, the crowds were even larger, more unified. People weren't just angry anymore, they were inspired. They were ready for the change that Elon and his team had been fighting for. The conversation was no longer just about renewable energy, it was about justice. It was about accountability. But the energy corporations weren't going down without a fight. They unleashed a final, desperate counterattack. They tried to discredit the leaked report, claiming it was a forgery. They used their political connections to pressure governments into ignoring the growing calls for change. And, perhaps most dangerously, they began to question Elon's personal motivations. Was he truly the visionary he claimed to be, or was he just another billionaire trying to reshape the world for his own gain? As the heat of the battle intensified, the prodigies knew they had to dig deeper into their strategy. They couldn't let the opposition distract them with false narratives. They had to stay focused, stay united, and continue to show the world the truth. Ava, ever the realist, sat across from Elon one night as they reviewed the latest developments. "We've made incredible progress, but we're not out of the woods yet. The next few weeks are crucial. If we falter now, everything we've worked for could crumble." Elon nodded. "I know, but we're not backing down. We've come too far, and we've already shown the world what's possible. Now it's time to make sure they can't ignore us." Ravi chimed in. "We have one final move left. We need to call on the world's leaders to make a commitment to a global energy transition. We need them to publicly support the changes we're fighting for." Ethan smiled. "And we need to make sure that when they do, they understand that they're not just endorsing a project, they're endorsing a movement. A movement that the people are already behind." The plan was set. The next stage of the battle had begun. As the energy giants launched their final, desperate counterattack, the prodigies knew it was only a matter of time before they were forced into a corner. The battle for the future of energy was no longer just about innovative technologies or grassroots movements. It had become a high-stakes war of influence and power. Elon and his team had made it clear that they were in this for the long haul. Every rally, every press conference, every viral video they shared was designed to push the narrative forward. The world had seen the evidence, heard the stories, and felt the urgency. Now it was time to take the fight to the next level. A global commitment that would force the hands of governments and corporations alike. The plan was audacious. Elon and the Prodigies would gather world leaders in a monumental summit. They would leverage their influence, their newfound popularity, and the groundswell of public support to put energy transition on the global agenda. They would present an ultimatum, nothing short of full-scale action to transition to renewable energy within a decade, or the world would risk falling further into environmental and economic turmoil. Elon stood before the mirror in his office, adjusting his jacket. He felt the weight of what was to come. This wasn't just another business meeting or product launch. This was the moment that would define his legacy, one way or another. He thought of all the people who had supported the movement, the millions who had raised their voices in protest, and the prodigies who had stood by him through thick and thin. "We have to make this count," he murmured to himself. The day of the summit arrived, and the tension was palpable. Delegates from over 50 countries filled the grand conference hall, with cameras flashing and reporters crowding the aisles. Elon and his team stood at the front, their collective presence a stark contrast to the rows of dignitaries in suits. They were the disruptors, the dreamers, and the world was about to see if their vision could turn into reality. The world leaders took their seats, some skeptical, some curious, and others just trying to figure out how to navigate the new political landscape. Elon, Ava, Ethan, Ravi, and the rest of the team walked up to the podium. Elon began his speech with his signature clarity and focus. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today is not just about the future of energy. It is about the future of humanity. We've reached a point where we can no longer afford to be passive in the face of climate change. The evidence is clear. The science is irrefutable. Our dependence on fossil fuels is not just unsustainable, it is a ticking time bomb." He paused for a moment, looking around the room at the gathered leaders. "We can continue down the path we're on and watch as our planet burns, our oceans rise, and our future slips through our fingers. Or we can act today. And we can lead the world into a new era of sustainable energy that will create millions of jobs, preserve our planet, and secure the future for generations to come." There was a tense silence in the room, the weight of Elon's words hanging in the air. Finally, the first leader spoke. "We've heard your arguments, Mr. Musk," a high-ranking European official said. "But the transition is far too costly. It's not as simple as just shifting technologies. We're talking about an entire economic system that needs to change." Ava stepped forward, speaking with quiet confidence. "We're not asking for something impossible. The technology is already here. The challenge is political will. We've seen communities all over the world, whether it's in small towns or urban centers, already transitioning to renewable energy. The world is ready. The only question is whether you are willing to act." The debate that followed was intense, filled with points of contention. Some leaders were resistant, clinging to the old guard, unwilling to let go of the power and profit they reaped from the fossil fuel industry. Others, however, were beginning to see the writing on the wall. They knew that if they didn't act soon, their positions would be undermined by the rising tide of public demand for change. As the summit dragged on, the debate shifted from one of skepticism to one of negotiation. What began as an outright rejection of the renewable future was slowly turning into a conversation about how to make it happen. The energy giant's influence was still present, but it was starting to weaken. The people, through their protests, their voices, and their digital presence, had tipped the scale. In a private meeting later that evening, Elon met with a group of key leaders who had shown openness to the vision. These were the decision-makers who had the power to change the course of history. "We're not asking you to do this alone," Elon said. "We have the technology. We have the solutions. What we need is for you to lead the charge. The people want this. The future demands it. All that's left is for you to make the commitment." One leader from Asia leaned forward. "How can we be sure this is sustainable? How can we be certain that this won't bankrupt our economies or leave our citizens vulnerable?" Ethan spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about energy. It's about future-proofing economies. Solar, wind, and geothermal energy aren't just environmentally sound. They're economically viable. They create jobs, stimulate innovation, and put power back in the hands of communities. We've already seen it in the places where these technologies are thriving. You have nothing to lose but everything to gain." Finally, after hours of intense discussions, something unprecedented happened. The group of leaders stood together and, with a mixture of solemnity and determination, announced a joint declaration. They would commit to transitioning their nations to 100% renewable energy within a decade, with a plan to fund it through a global green investment fund. The declaration called for a collaborative effort between governments, corporations, and the public, ensuring that no one would be left behind in the transition. Elon and his team were stunned. They had expected resistance, but they hadn't anticipated such a bold commitment. The world had just shifted on its axis. The announcement reverberated across the globe, with both celebration and backlash. The energy giants tried to downplay the agreement, but their influence had waned. The people had won. As Elon stood on the steps of the summit building, surrounded by the Prodigies, he took a moment to reflect on what had just transpired. The fight wasn't over. There would be obstacles ahead, and the road to a sustainable future would be long and challenging. But for the first time, the world had made a real commitment, a commitment to the future. "The next chapter starts now," Elon said, his voice filled with resolve. "We've won the battle, but the real work is just beginning." The world had taken a monumental step. The global commitment to a renewable energy future had set the stage for the most ambitious environmental overhaul in history. The press hailed it as a new dawn for humanity, and public opinion overwhelmingly supported the decision. For the first time in decades, there was genuine hope that the planet might still be saved. But while the world celebrated, a powerful undercurrent of resistance was already forming. The energy giants, their monopoly on the world's resources slipping through their fingers, quickly realized that their old tactics of influence and misinformation were no longer enough. They had underestimated the determination of Elon Musk and his prodigies. Now, with their backs against the wall, they would resort to even more aggressive strategies. It started subtly. News outlets, many owned by or affiliated with the energy conglomerates, began to run stories questioning the feasibility of the global transition. They painted the new renewable future as unrealistic, calling it a pipe dream that would lead to economic collapse and widespread energy shortages. "What happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow?" they asked, pushing the narrative of uncertainty and fear. In political circles, opponents of the initiative began to mount a coordinated campaign. Some argued that the pace of change was too fast, others insisted that the transition was far too costly. And perhaps most dangerously, a handful of prominent figures claimed that Elon Musk was a self-interested billionaire who was using this push for renewable energy to increase his wealth and control over global markets. Elon, however, was undeterred. He had expected the resistance, even predicted it. He knew that the stakes were too high for the powers that be to simply let the change happen without a fight. In the midst of this backlash, Elon called an emergency meeting with his prodigies. They needed a new plan, one that could neutralize the misinformation campaign and reassure the world that their vision wasn't just an idealistic fantasy. It was a workable, pragmatic solution to the world's most pressing issues. "I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight," Elon began, standing at the front of the room. "But we've got something they can't ignore, the truth. We need to show them, show the world, that this transition is not just possible, it's necessary. We need to cut through their lies and put the facts front and center." Ava spoke up. "The media is the battlefield right now. They've hijacked the conversation. We need to take control of the narrative, highlight the success stories of the energy transition, show people the impact that renewable energy has had on communities. Highlight the businesses that are thriving, the jobs that are being created. People need to see that this isn't just theory. It's happening." Ravi, ever the strategist, added, "We also need to build stronger coalitions. There's still a divide, especially in the political landscape. Some leaders are on our side, but we need more to jump on board. We need to make sure that everyone understands that this isn't a partisan issue. It's about saving the future." Ethan, ever the tactician, was already working the numbers. "The economics are in our favor. Fossil fuels are a dying industry. We have the data to prove it. We need to show governments that investing in renewables now will pay off in the long run. It will create jobs, improve energy security, and mitigate the devastating impacts of climate change. We've got a real shot at winning the next wave of political support." Elon nodded. "Exactly. We're not just selling hope. We're selling a future. A sustainable, thriving future." We need to keep pushing. We need to flood the airwaves, the digital platforms, and the town halls. We need to show that the people are demanding this change, and that the status quo has no place in the future. The next phase of the battle was a full-scale media blitz, led by Elon and the Prodigies. They took to social media, releasing powerful testimonials from individuals who had already embraced renewable energy in their communities. From small towns to major cities, these stories highlighted the tangible benefits of switching to clean energy, lower energy bills, cleaner air, and thriving local economies. But it wasn't just about the feel-good stories. They also launched a series of data-driven campaigns that showcased the economic advantages of renewable energy. They highlighted the massive job creation potential, the decreasing costs of solar and wind technologies, and the emerging industries that were being built around sustainable energy. At the same time, Elon and his team worked behind the scenes to secure the support of key political leaders. They reached out to the global champions of the renewable cause, people who understood the urgency of the moment and had the courage to stand firm against the political pressure being exerted by the fossil fuel lobby. One by one, more nations signed on to the commitment. Countries that had once been reluctant to embrace renewable energy were now seeing the benefits, and with public pressure mounting, they were beginning to shift their positions. Even some of the largest fossil fuel-producing nations were forced to acknowledge that the future was changing, and that they could either be part of that change or be left behind. The opposition, however, wasn't done. As the global movement for renewable energy grew stronger, the energy giants fought back with everything they had. They flooded the media with disinformation, sponsored political candidates who were staunchly opposed to the transition, and lobbied governments to stall any meaningful progress. The battle lines were being drawn more clearly now. On one side, the people, represented by Elon, his prodigies, and the growing number of activists and advocates for renewable energy. On the other, the powerful corporations who had built their fortunes on the exploitation of fossil fuels. Elon knew the fight would not be easy, but he was more determined than ever. He had seen the power of collective action and the impact of innovation. He had witnessed firsthand the way the world was shifting, how people everywhere were demanding a cleaner, more sustainable future. And he wasn't going to let the powerful forces of the past stop them. The next chapter was one of perseverance and unity, a fight for the future that would push everyone involved to their limits. The world was divided. On one side, a growing movement for renewable energy was sweeping through nations, driven by public demand, scientific consensus, and the tireless efforts of Elon and his prodigies. On the other, the entrenched power of the fossil fuel industry was pulling every lever it could to maintain its stranglehold on the global economy. Elon knew that the battle was no longer just about technology or policy. It had become a fight for the very soul of humanity's future. The energy giants were using every tactic at their disposal, misinformation, lobbying, economic threats, to slow the momentum of the green revolution. But for every move they made, the world seemed to push back with even greater resolve. It was during this critical time that an unexpected event would shift the course of the battle. Elon and his team were preparing for a major international rally that would coincide with the United Nations Climate Summit. The rally was a crucial moment, a chance to show the world that the renewable energy movement was not just a trend, but a global force with the power to create lasting change. Elon sat with his team in the war room, reviewing the plans. Ava, ever the strategist, was focused on ensuring the rally was organized and impactful. We need every person to feel like their voice matters. This is about more than just standing in front of a crowd. It's about mobilizing people to take real, tangible action. Ravi, always a step ahead, was already working on the logistical side. We've got to make sure we reach the biggest audience possible. This isn't just about the live event. It's about streaming it to every corner of the world. We need to create a viral moment that keeps the energy moving. Ethan was in his element, crunching the numbers. If we can get even a fraction of the world's population involved, sharing, posting, commenting, this will be the most successful rally the world has ever seen. Elon stood up, looking at each member of his team. This is it. This is the moment we've been working toward. Let's make sure the world knows that we're not just a movement. We're a force. The rally exceeded all expectations. Tens of millions of people, from all walks of life, gathered virtually and in person to show their support for the renewable energy transition. Celebrities, activists, scientists, and ordinary citizens took to the stage, all united in their message. The future of the planet depended on immediate, large-scale action to combat climate change. Elon took the stage last. As the crowd erupted into applause, he stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The global solidarity was overwhelming. He could feel the energy in the air, a palpable sense of hope mixed with the realization that the road ahead would not be easy. "I stand here today not just as a businessman or an entrepreneur," Elon began, his voice carrying through the massive speakers. "I stand here as a father, as a son, as someone who wants to leave a better world for the next generation. This movement isn't just about technology or policy. It's about securing a future where our children and grandchildren can thrive in a world that is sustainable and just." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "We've taken a step toward that future today, but this is only the beginning. We've shown that we are not just fighting for our future. We are fighting for our planet. And together, we will make this future a reality." The rally was a resounding success, but Elon knew that the real work had just begun. The energy giants would continue to fight, and the political landscape would remain turbulent. But with the global momentum behind them, the Prodigies were more determined than ever to see their vision through. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The battle for a sustainable world had shifted irrevocably in their favor. The rally had left a profound impact on the world. With millions of voices calling for change, governments were now under unprecedented pressure to act. The energy giants, who had previously controlled the narrative, found themselves on the defensive. The momentum was undeniable, but the path ahead was still fraught with obstacles. As the political winds began to shift in favor of renewable energy, the true power of the fossil fuel industry started to reveal itself, not in the headlines, but in the behind-the-scenes dealings that could sway entire governments. For Elon and his team, the fight had just entered a more dangerous phase. They had exposed the industry's lies, but the energy giants weren't going down without a fight. Their next strategy was to infiltrate the very institutions that had the power to stop the renewable movement before it reached critical mass. They knew they had to act quickly, before the green energy revolution became unstoppable. The first signs of the coming storm appeared during a seemingly routine UN climate summit. As representatives from around the world gathered to discuss the next steps in the global energy transition, a series of high-profile political leaders began to speak out against the rapid push for renewable energy. They questioned the feasibility of the transition, citing concerns over job losses in fossil fuel sectors, disruptions to national economies, and the potential rise in energy costs. But Elon was prepared for this. He knew that the argument about job loss was a distraction, a tactic to stall progress. Renewable energy was a massive job creator, not a job killer. So, he responded, loudly and clearly, at the summit. "We are at a crossroads," he told the audience, his voice cutting through the air. "The question is not whether we can afford to transition to clean energy. The question is, can we afford not to? The costs of inaction will be far greater than any challenges we face in making this change. We have the power to create millions of new jobs, to build a new economy based on sustainability. The world is watching, and the time for action is now." Elon's words resonated across the room, but the opposition didn't relent. Behind closed doors, the fossil fuel industry was working its own angles. They had one last card to play, a massive lobbying campaign to convince leaders that a gradual transition, rather than an immediate one, was the more pragmatic approach. Back at the headquarters of Musk's initiative, the Prodigies were feeling the pressure. The opposition was more organized than they had anticipated, and they had the resources to fight back with everything they had. Ava knew the strategy: take the fight to the people. We can't let the politicians decide this for us. We need to keep the pressure on, show them that the public is not backing down. The team launched a new social media campaign, targeting key politicians who had begun to waver in their support for renewable energy. They used data-driven strategies to demonstrate how voting against green energy initiatives would be politically disastrous. The messaging was simple but effective. Those who stood against the movement were standing against the future of humanity. It wasn't just about policy, it was about survival. Ravi had his own battle to fight. The coalitions they had built were beginning to splinter under pressure. He worked tirelessly, reaching out to allies in government, business, and civil society. "We need to make sure we're not just fighting against the fossil fuel industry," he told his team. "We need to unite everyone who has a stake in the future. This isn't just an energy issue, it's an economic and moral one." Meanwhile, Ethan continued to work on the financial front, gathering more data and projections to back up the claim that the economic benefits of renewable energy would far outweigh the short-term costs. They needed more evidence, more proof to push their case to the undecided governments and hesitant politicians. The situation reached a boiling point when an unexpected leak from the fossil fuel industry revealed that they had been secretly funding political candidates who had publicly claimed to support clean energy. These candidates, however, were privately working to delay and sabotage renewable initiatives at every turn. This bombshell rocked the political landscape. The hypocrisy was undeniable, and once again, the public's outrage reached a fever pitch. Social media exploded with hashtags like #GreenEnergyNow and #FossilFuelFraud, and mass protests erupted in cities worldwide. The momentum shifted once again. People were no longer just demanding a transition to renewable energy, they were demanding accountability. They wanted to know who was pulling the strings behind the scenes and why governments were allowing it to happen. Elon had been in countless high-stakes situations before, but this one felt different. The world was on the edge, and his team was at the center of it all. He knew the key to winning was not just defeating the opposition, but transforming the entire political system that allowed such corporate manipulation to thrive. He called an emergency meeting with his prodigies. "We've won the battle for the hearts and minds of the people, but now we have to take it further. We need to make sure the systems that allowed this kind of corruption are reformed. We need to push for transparency, for global laws that prevent corporate interests from sabotaging climate progress." Ava nodded. "It's not enough to just push for renewable energy anymore. We have to change the rules of the game entirely. If we don't, we'll just be putting a new face on the same old system." Ravi agreed. "This is the tipping point. We can't just focus on the short-term victory. We need to create the political will for long-term change. We need to push for policies that incentivize green technologies, that penalize corporate polluters, and that hold governments accountable for their inaction." Ethan added, "And we need to make sure that every government knows this isn't just a trend, it's the future. The financial markets are already moving in the direction of sustainability. If they want to remain competitive, they'll have no choice but to get on board." Elon paused, looking at each of his team members. "This is it. We've fought hard to get here, but the real work is just beginning." The battle was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like they were on the cusp of a new era. The future was still uncertain, but the momentum was shifting, and with it, the power to shape that future was within reach. As the world watched in awe, the renewable energy movement gained an unprecedented level of global support. What had once been a niche industry was now a full-fledged, unstoppable force. But this victory was bittersweet. For every door that opened, another one closed, and the challenges continued to mount. The fossil fuel industry wasn't going to just fade away. They were digging in their heels, desperately trying to hold onto their stranglehold on global energy. Their tactics had become more aggressive: lobbying efforts, smear campaigns against key figures in the movement, and, in some cases, legal action designed to stifle progress. Their resources were endless, and they were willing to use every weapon in their arsenal to protect the status quo. It became clear to Elon and his team that the only way to truly win was to build an alliance that spanned beyond just governments and corporations. They needed the support of every sector: the tech giants, the climate activists, even the average citizen. The battle for the future of the planet was not a fight for one group to win, but for every person to stand together in solidarity. It was at this moment that a new player entered the scene, one whose influence could shift the entire balance of power. During a high-level meeting with the United Nations, a representative from the global tech community made a groundbreaking proposal. The tech world, led by the likes of Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, had come to the conclusion that their futures were intertwined with the future of renewable energy. The tech giants had always been heavily invested in the digital economy, but now, with the increasing threat of climate change, they saw that their own survival depended on shifting to sustainable energy sources. Their infrastructure, their data centers, and even their manufacturing processes were contributing to the growing carbon footprint. It was no longer enough to talk about green technology. The tech world needed to become the driving force behind the transformation. At a pivotal conference in Silicon Valley, a joint statement was released, backed by every major tech company, declaring their commitment to a sustainable future. The statement was clear. The tech industry would work with renewable energy companies, governments, and environmental organizations to accelerate the transition to a green global economy. Elon watched the conference with a sense of awe. This was the breakthrough they needed. With the support of the tech industry, they could revolutionize the infrastructure that was holding back the green energy movement. Renewable energy wouldn't just be something people would turn to out of necessity. It would be embedded in the very fabric of how the world operated. Ava was the first to speak up after reading the statement. This is huge. The tech giants have the resources and the innovation to push renewable energy to places we couldn't have imagined a year ago. We're talking about energy systems that can power entire cities using AI and machine learning to optimize energy consumption. Elon nodded. But we also need to keep the pressure on the governments. We need policies that encourage this collaboration, subsidies for green tech, incentives for companies that make the switch, and stricter regulations on carbon emissions. Ravi was already on his phone, working the connections he had within the political world. I'm in touch with a few key players in the European Union. If we can get the ball rolling there, it'll create a domino effect. We need a global approach, not just piecemeal solutions. Ethan added, and we need to ensure that we're not just talking about the big players. We can't forget the millions of small businesses and individuals who are the backbone of this movement. If we can get them on board, the corporate giants won't have the same hold over the future. But just as the alliance began to form, a shadow emerged. A series of mysterious cyberattacks began to hit several of the companies that had pledged their support to the renewable energy movement. Websites were taken down, sensitive data was leaked, and critical infrastructure was damaged. The attacks seemed to have no clear origin, but the pattern was unmistakable. This was not a random event. It didn't take long for Elon and his team to realize that the fossil fuel industry was striking back. Desperate to maintain control, they had turned to the one weapon that could cause chaos: cyber warfare. Elon convened an emergency meeting with his inner circle. We knew they'd fight dirty, but this is next level. They're willing to sabotage the entire system if it means holding on to their power. Ava was the first to speak. We need to fight back. We can't let them stop us. The tech companies are already building more secure systems, but we also need to make sure that the public knows about these attacks. If the world sees that the fossil fuel industry is trying to sabotage this movement, they'll lose what little credibility they have left. Ravi added, we'll need a two-pronged approach. 1. We continue to push forward with the tech industry. We use their innovations to shore up our defenses. And 2, we expose the attacks for what they are. We need to make sure this doesn't just blow over. Elon's eyes were focused. We take the fight to them. We have the people, we have the tech, and we have the truth. The more they attack, the stronger we become. As the attacks continued, the public reaction was swift. Social media was flooded with calls for boycotts of the companies implicated in the cyber attacks, and the hashtag #FossilFuelTerrorists began to trend. The movement for clean energy had grown from a simple call for action to a global movement for justice. It wasn't just about renewable energy anymore. It was about standing up to the forces that had been manipulating the system for decades. Elon and his team knew that this was their moment. They had exposed the fossil fuel industry's desperation. Now, it was time to push forward, harder than ever before. The stage was set. The battle lines had been drawn. And as the world united to confront the shadowy forces that sought to hold it back, Elon Musk and his prodigies stood ready to lead the charge. They weren't just fighting for a sustainable future. They were fighting for the very future of humanity. The world had come a long way in its pursuit of renewable energy. The winds of change were stronger than ever, but the forces that sought to maintain the status quo were just as relentless. As Elon and his team ramped up their efforts, they found themselves in a precarious position. The fossil fuel industry had thrown everything they had at the movement, from cyber attacks to smear campaigns to political pressure. But now, a new and more subtle challenge was emerging. The climate crisis, which had once been a looming threat, was now an undeniable reality. Wildfires, floods, and unprecedented weather patterns were wreaking havoc across the globe. Countries were feeling the impact of climate change firsthand, and citizens were growing restless. People were demanding action, and the pressure on governments was reaching a breaking point. But while the public was more determined than ever, a divide was beginning to form. There were those who, still deeply entrenched in the fossil fuel industries, believed that the renewable energy push was a threat to their livelihoods and their country's economies. On the other side were those who, like Elon and his team, believed that the future of humanity depended on making the transition as quickly and as radically as possible. The tipping point came when the United States held an emergency summit to discuss the escalating climate crisis. The world watched as President Kennedy stood before the media, flanked by political leaders, business moguls, and environmental advocates. The question that loomed was whether America would take bold steps to lead the world in the transition to renewable energy, or whether they would remain tethered to the fossil fuel giants for a little longer. Elon had been preparing for this moment. He knew the political landscape inside and out, and he was ready to bring every ounce of pressure to bear on the decision-makers. But this time, it wasn't just about presenting data or delivering a compelling speech. It was about demonstrating that the fossil fuel industry's grip on power was slipping, and the people were ready to take action. Ava, who had become an expert at navigating the media and public opinion, organized a powerful grassroots campaign leading up to the summit. The campaign highlighted the real-world impacts of the climate crisis, featuring stories from ordinary people who had been directly affected by extreme weather, wildfires, and flooding. She knew that if the public saw the human toll of the crisis, they would be galvanized into action. Ravi was busy behind the scenes, reaching out to key political figures who had shown signs of wavering. He reminded them that their political futures were on the line. "The people want action, not empty promises," he said in a series of private meetings with senators and governors. "If you don't take a stand now, you risk alienating your base forever." Meanwhile, Ethan worked tirelessly to secure new investments for renewable energy projects. He had developed a compelling economic argument. The shift to green energy would create millions of jobs, stimulate new industries, and invigorate economies worldwide. The numbers didn't lie, and Ethan knew that the business community, even those not traditionally aligned with environmental causes, would eventually see the financial benefits. The day of the summit arrived, and the world watched with bated breath. In a secure room in Washington, D.C., representatives from the United States, the European Union, and several other global leaders gathered to discuss the future of energy. The air was thick with anticipation as Elon Musk, President Kennedy, and other key figures took their seats. The opening remarks were predictably cautious. Politicians and business leaders spoke about the need for compromise, the importance of maintaining jobs in traditional energy sectors, and the challenges of transitioning to a clean energy future. But as the discussions grew more intense, it became clear that the fossil fuel industry had dug in its heels. It was then that Elon took the floor. Calm but resolute, he addressed the assembly. "You've heard all the arguments for gradualism," he said, his voice steady. "But let me be clear, the time for gradualism is over. We are on the verge of catastrophic climate collapse. The science is clear, the people are demanding action, and the only question that remains is this: will we act now, or will we wait until it's too late?" His words hung in the air, and for a moment there was silence. Then, the breakthrough came. A powerful coalition of tech leaders, environmental activists, and forward-thinking politicians began to rally behind Elon's call. They were no longer willing to compromise or drag their feet. They had seen the damage, felt the urgency, and understood that the cost of inaction was too great. They pushed for bold action, for policies that would accelerate the transition to renewable energy, even if it meant upsetting the status quo. Back in the war room, the team watched as the summit reached its peak. The battle lines were drawn. The opposition, desperate to hold on to power, tried to rally their supporters, but the tide had shifted. The public pressure, the media scrutiny, and the overwhelming evidence of the urgency of the crisis had reached a critical point. Then, in a dramatic moment that stunned everyone in the room, President Kennedy turned to the fossil fuel representatives and said, "The time for waiting is over. We will move forward with a plan to accelerate the green transition. The future of our children, of our economy, and of our planet depends on it. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in history, a major world power had committed to a radical, transformative shift toward renewable energy. It was the victory that Elon and his team had been working toward for years, but it was only the beginning. But as they celebrated the breakthrough, Elon knew the hardest part was yet to come. The battle wasn't just about securing political commitments. It was about ensuring that the transition was sustainable, equitable, and fast enough to avert the worst effects of climate change. Today was a victory, he told his team, but the real work starts now. We have to ensure that the promises made here are carried out and that no one can stop the momentum we've built. Ava, Ravi, and Ethan nodded in agreement. They had all seen the signs. The fossil fuel industry would fight back with everything they had. They had to be ready for whatever came next. As the world began to change, the first steps toward a new future were taken. The journey had been long, filled with conflict, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But in the end, it had been worth it. Because with each step forward, they were not just fighting for a cleaner planet. They were fighting for a better world for everyone. The victory at the summit was monumental. The world had turned a corner. The commitment to a clean energy future was no longer a distant dream but a tangible reality. The forces of change had gathered, and the world's most powerful governments and corporations had pledged to accelerate the shift to renewable energy. But despite the overwhelming support, Elon and his team understood that the battle was far from over. They were facing an enemy that could not be defeated with mere policies or speeches, an enemy that had woven itself into the very fabric of the global economy. It was a silent, insidious force that operated in the shadows. The deep state of fossil fuel interests, the ones who controlled the levers of power from behind the scenes, away from the public eye. In the weeks following the summit, it became clear that the fossil fuel industry wasn't just fighting through direct action anymore. They were using more subtle tactics, corruption, misinformation, and even sabotage to undermine the progress they had made. The battle for renewable energy had entered a new phase, one where Elon, Ava, Ravi, and Ethan would need to stay one step ahead, not just of corporate interests, but of unseen forces working behind closed doors. The first sign that something was wrong came when Elon's communications team reported an alarming rise in fake news stories and media campaigns targeting the green energy initiative. What had started as a small trickle of misinformation now began to flood social media platforms. There were stories claiming that green energy was a hoax, that renewable technologies were inefficient, and that the costs of transitioning to a green economy were far greater than the benefits. Ava's phone rang. It was a media executive who had been working closely with her. "You're not going to believe this," the voice on the other end said. "I just got word from a top news network. An anonymous source is claiming that the renewable energy industry is actually more harmful to the environment than fossil fuels." Ava's stomach turned. This is getting out of hand. How widespread is this? It's going viral. It's spreading like wildfire. I don't know who's behind it, but it's coordinated. Elon, as usual, was ready for action. He immediately called a meeting with his team. They knew that this wasn't just a random attack. The timing was too perfect. The fossil fuel industry had been dealt a blow at the summit, and now they were retaliating in the only way they knew how, through manipulation of the narrative. "We need to fight back," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "We've been hit with an orchestrated campaign, and it's only going to get worse. We need to expose this for what it is." Ravi leaned forward. "But how do we expose something we can't see? If they're using proxies, if they're hiding behind anonymous sources, how do we trace it back?" "We focus on the facts," Ava said, her mind already working. "We gather the data, the science, and the stories. We make it impossible for them to twist the narrative. And we go public with it. Show the world who's behind this and why." The team worked around the clock, gathering evidence, conducting interviews with climate scientists, renewable energy experts, and citizens who had been impacted by climate change. They compiled an airtight case to counter the misinformation that was spreading. But they knew this wasn't enough. They needed to go further. Elon knew that in the world of politics, money was often the most powerful weapon, and the fossil fuel industry had an abundance of it. They had invested millions, if not billions, into maintaining the status quo. It was time to dig deeper. Elon and his team turned their attention to the financial networks that kept the fossil fuel industry alive. They traced the flow of money from the largest fossil fuel companies to political campaigns, media outlets, and lobbying groups. It didn't take long before they uncovered a vast network of influence, one that stretched across borders and connected the industry's most powerful figures to a web of financial institutions, think tanks, and politicians. One afternoon, Ravi stumbled upon a troubling lead: a secretive consortium of investors who were funding a think tank dedicated to discrediting the renewable energy movement. The think tank studies, though dressed up as legitimate research, were based on manipulated data and flawed conclusions. "I think we've found the source," Ravi said, his voice tense as he reviewed the documents. "These guys have been working under the radar, funding campaigns, and spreading disinformation about renewable energy." Elon glanced at the files. "This is bigger than we thought. They're not just trying to stall the transition, they're trying to kill it." With this new information, Elon and his team launched a public investigation into the funding behind the disinformation campaign. They partnered with journalists, independent researchers, and transparency organizations to track down the money trail. The investigation quickly gained momentum as more and more journalists began to dig into the hidden network of fossil fuel interests. The world watched in shock as the scandal unfolded. The public was outraged to learn that the very institutions that had been attacking the renewable energy movement were being bankrolled by the fossil fuel industry. As the evidence piled up, it became clear that these interests had been deliberately sowing doubt and confusion to protect their profits. The tipping point came when a whistleblower from within one of the most influential think tanks came forward. The insider revealed that the organization had been paid millions to produce fake studies, influence policy, and provide talking points for politicians and media outlets who were aligned with the fossil fuel agenda. The public outcry was deafening. It was no longer just about climate change. It was about transparency, accountability, and justice. The revelations rocked the political world, and governments around the globe began to take action. Investigations were launched, and some of the most prominent figures in the fossil fuel industry were called to testify before Congress. Elon stood at the forefront of this movement, unwavering in his resolve. "This is just the beginning," he said in a press conference, his voice strong and clear. "We've exposed the enemy's lies, but we're not done yet. Now, we take the next step, closing the door on fossil fuels once and for all." As the team celebrated this hard-won victory, they knew there was still much work ahead. The enemy had been exposed, but their grip on the global economy was far from broken. There would be more battles to fight, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, they knew they were on the right side of history, and they had the truth on their side. The war for the future of the planet was entering its final phase. And with the world watching, Elon and his team were ready to lead the charge. The aftermath of the scandal had left the world reeling. For the first time, the shadowy figures behind the fossil fuel industry's propaganda machine had been brought into the light. Their attempts to discredit the renewable energy movement had failed, but their influence was far from eradicated. In the days and weeks following the whistleblower's revelations, protests erupted around the globe. People were outraged, but they were also energized. They knew that the battle for the future had just entered a new phase, one that would require every ounce of strength they had. Elon Musk stood at the forefront of this movement, but he wasn't alone. Ava, Ravi, Ethan, and the entire team had helped expose the underbelly of the system. But now, the real work began. Putting the system in place to make sure the renewable energy revolution wasn't just a flash in the pan, but a sustainable shift that would change the world for generations to come. Ava and Ravi worked overtime, coordinating with activists, politicians, and world leaders to ensure that the momentum would not die. They knew the next step was critical: rebuilding the global energy infrastructure and ensuring that the promises made in the wake of the scandal were kept. They organized rallies, held public forums, and made sure that the voices of the people were heard louder than ever before. Ravi, always the strategist, was pushing for aggressive policy changes at the national and international levels. "We need to take control of this moment," he said one evening as he pored over reports. "If we don't lock in policy changes now, we risk losing everything. We have the public support, but we need political commitment. The legislation needs to be drafted, signed, and enforced." Elon, meanwhile, focused on expanding the technological infrastructure that would make the transition a reality. SpaceX and Tesla were ramping up their production of renewable energy solutions, solar panels, energy storage systems, and electric vehicles. The goal wasn't just to produce these products in high volumes. It was to make them affordable, efficient, and accessible to people everywhere. We need to make renewable energy as ubiquitous as gasoline, Elon said during a team meeting. The transition can't be something that's just for the privileged few. It needs to be for everyone. Ethan, who had become an expert in navigating the economic implications of this global shift, was instrumental in securing new funding for large-scale infrastructure projects. His pitch was simple. The renewable energy transition would generate massive economic growth, create millions of jobs, and reduce global energy costs. It was a win-win. We can't just build solar farms and wind turbines, Ethan explained to a group of investors. We need to build an entirely new global grid that connects people, businesses, and countries in ways that were never possible before. It's the infrastructure of the future, and if we do this right, the rewards will be unprecedented. As the team worked relentlessly to push forward the green energy agenda, a new sense of optimism began to sweep across the globe. People were tired of being stuck in a cycle of crisis after crisis, climate disasters, economic instability, and political gridlock. They saw the potential of a new way forward, and they were determined to make it happen. One of the most striking shifts occurred in the public's perception of renewable energy. What had once been seen as an idealistic dream or an expensive luxury was now regarded as the future, necessary, urgent, and achievable. The economic benefits of transitioning to green energy were becoming more evident by the day. From the creation of thousands of new jobs to the reduction in energy costs for consumers, it was clear that the renewable revolution was bringing about a massive economic transformation. Governments, which had been hesitant to commit fully to renewable energy, began to shift their positions as well. In the United States, Congress passed a sweeping green energy bill that mandated a rapid transition to renewable energy sources. International agreements were brokered, and countries like China and India, long resistant to the idea, finally pledged to reduce their carbon emissions and invest in sustainable energy sources. But even as the green energy movement surged forward, the opposition did not disappear. The fossil fuel industry, though wounded, was not going down without a fight. They still had vast amounts of money, influence, and political power, and they were using every tool at their disposal to slow the transition. Elon knew this would be a long and hard fight. They'll continue to undermine us, he said to his team, his voice grim but resolute. We'll need to stay focused and relentless. We can't let them regain their footing. One day, Elon received an urgent call from President Kennedy. We've got a problem, the president said. There's been a coordinated effort to discredit your work again. Some of the most powerful lobbying groups are making moves to halt the transition, and they're pushing new legislation in key states. They've even managed to get some of the environmentalists on their side by offering financial incentives. Elon's grip tightened on the phone. I thought we had more allies. What's going on? They're playing a long game, Kennedy replied, and they've gotten smarter. They're targeting the green energy advocates with promises of compromise, promising economic support for certain sectors of the industry in exchange for halting the transition. It's a divide-and-conquer strategy. The next few months would be some of the most challenging for Elon and his team. They had to fight off the influence of the fossil fuel lobby, which was now working with some unlikely allies, moderate environmental groups that had grown weary of the aggressive push for renewable energy. These groups, though well-meaning, had fallen victim to the promises of the fossil fuel industry's political handlers. Ava was the first to recognize the danger. They're creating a wedge. They're offering short-term solutions to environmental groups that are desperate for change, but they're really just delaying the inevitable. Elon knew what had to be done. We can't let them compromise our future. We need to show people that we're not just fighting for a cleaner planet, we're fighting for a better future for everyone. We have to stay true to our vision. As the team prepared for the next phase of the battle, they felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They weren't just fighting for their own success or their own companies. They were fighting for the survival of the planet, for the well-being of generations yet to come. The world was watching, and the future was still uncertain. But one thing was clear: the fight for a sustainable, green energy future was far from over. And this time, the forces of change were not backing down. The stage was set. The green energy movement had taken the world by storm, but the fossil fuel industry's last-ditch efforts to hold on to power had thrown a wrench into the momentum. Behind the scenes, corporate lobbyists were working tirelessly to create new policies that could derail the transition. But Elon and his team knew that the time for half measures was over. It was time to escalate the fight. As the pressure mounted, they began to focus not only on political power and public awareness, but on something that had the potential to change the world entirely: the people. It began with a simple idea. Elon, Ava, and Ravi were discussing strategy one evening when Ava posed the question that would spark a global movement. What if we could make renewable energy personal? What if, instead of just presenting the benefits of going green, we made it something everyone could take ownership of? Elon paused, rubbing his chin as he considered the idea. What do you mean by personal? I'm talking about creating a movement where people don't just talk about green energy, Ava explained. We need to empower them to take action, to install solar panels on their homes, to use electric vehicles, to join the effort on the ground level. This can't be just something for governments and corporations. It needs to be a global uprising, a grassroots movement that can't be ignored. Ravi's eyes lit up. What if we could gamify it? What if we could use technology to track people's individual progress? We could make it competitive, create challenges, create rewards, and help people feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. Elon leaned back, deep in thought. I like this. A global movement, powered by individuals. We can tie it to social media, create a platform where people can share their success stories, challenge their friends, and feel a sense of accomplishment. We're not just selling a product anymore. We're selling a revolution. The team quickly got to work, and within a few weeks, the idea had transformed into a full-fledged campaign. They launched a platform called Green Earth, a global movement aimed at encouraging people to take action for the planet. The app allowed users to track their progress in adopting renewable energy solutions, installing solar panels, using electric cars, reducing their carbon footprint, and more. Users could compete against friends, cities, and even entire countries, all while earning rewards for their contributions to a greener planet. But Green Earth wasn't just about technology, it was about storytelling. The app allowed users to share their personal experiences and inspire others. Each post, each shared story, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of collective action. Elon knew the real power of the movement lay in the stories people would tell. If we can make this movement personal, if we can make it about who people are and what they care about, it won't be something we're pushing on them. It'll be something they're pushing forward themselves, he said. The response was overwhelming. Within a matter of days, millions of people had signed up. The Green Earth app became a viral sensation, with influencers, celebrities, and activists all promoting it. People began competing in massive challenges to see who could reduce their carbon footprint the most, who could install the most solar panels, and who could make the most sustainable choices in their daily lives. In cities around the world, green energy initiatives started to gain ground. People took to the streets, organizing marches, rallies, and community events. There was a palpable sense of urgency, but there was also a feeling of empowerment. It was no longer a top-down movement. It was a grassroots revolution, fueled by the people. But the fossil fuel industry wasn't giving up that easily. As the Green Earth campaign gained momentum, they began to retaliate in more aggressive ways. They hired influential public relations firms to launch a counter-campaign, claiming that renewable energy was unreliable, expensive, and ultimately a pipe dream. One of their most effective tactics was to play on people's fears. They commissioned reports warning that renewable energy would lead to massive job losses in traditional industries and would cause energy prices to skyrocket. They knew that fear, not facts, was often the most powerful tool in shaping public opinion. Elon was aware of these tactics, but wasn't about to back down. He knew that the key to winning this battle wasn't just about countering misinformation. It was about showing people the tangible benefits of renewable energy. He needed to make the reality of a clean energy future undeniable. Elon and his team began focusing on showcasing the success stories that were emerging all over the world. They created a documentary series called The Green Revolution, which featured individuals and communities who had made the switch to renewable energy and were thriving because of it. From families who had lowered their energy bills by installing solar panels to businesses that had saved millions by going green, the stories were powerful and compelling. In one episode, a small town in the Midwest, once dependent on coal, became a beacon of hope. The community banded together to create a local solar farm, generating jobs, clean energy, and a renewed sense of pride. In another, a car dealership in California started a fleet of electric vehicles that were flying off the lot, showing the world that the transition to electric cars was not only possible but profitable. The Green Revolution was more than just a media campaign. It was a symbol of hope. People who had been uncertain or fearful of the changes that lay ahead began to see the possibilities. They realized that the green energy movement wasn't just a solution to climate change. It was a solution to the problems they faced in their own lives. The fossil fuel industry's campaign of fear and misinformation began to falter in the face of this new wave of hope. As more and more people adopted renewable energy solutions, the narrative started to shift. Renewable energy wasn't just the future. It was already the present. The Green Earth movement had achieved what many thought was impossible. It had united millions of people across the globe in a common cause. It wasn't just about fighting for a cleaner planet. It was about fighting for a better future for everyone, regardless of where they lived or what they did for a living. Elon and his team knew that the fight wasn't over. There were still powerful forces working against them, but they had created something that could not be undone. A global uprising, one that was fueled not by politicians or corporations, but by the people themselves. And as the Green Earth movement continued to grow, it became clear that the world was on the verge of a new era, a future powered by the collective will of the people, united in their determination to make the planet a better place for future generations. The Green Earth movement had ignited a global shift, but with every revolution came resistance. Elon Musk, Ava, Ravi, Ethan, and the rest of the team knew they were fighting for more than just an energy transition. They were fighting to reshape the very systems that had held the world together for centuries. The fossil fuel industry's grip on power had been fractured, but not broken. In the halls of government, the boardrooms of oil giants, and the offices of political lobbyists, a silent war raged. The stakes had never been higher. But this time, the forces of change were not backing down. It was early morning when Elon received the call from President Kennedy. "We've got a situation," the president said, his voice laced with urgency. "The oil companies are pushing new legislation through Congress. They're trying to frame it as an emergency energy act, claiming that renewable energy is destabilizing the market and that we need to invest in cleaner fossil fuels for the sake of national security." Elon's jaw clenched. The fossil fuel industry had resorted to their last trick, using the specter of crisis to stall the transition. "What are we up against?" he asked, already preparing for the worst. "They've convinced a large portion of the government that renewable energy is too unreliable," Kennedy said. "They've even found a way to push an economic bailout package for oil companies under the guise of job protection." Elon's mind raced. He had anticipated this. If the fossil fuel industry couldn't stop the transition with misinformation, they would try to convince people it was too costly or disruptive. "We can't let them sell that narrative," Elon said firmly. "We need to show the world that this fight is not just about energy, it's about the future of humanity." Meanwhile, Ava and Ravi were working around the clock to organize grassroots campaigns, ensuring that the people wouldn't lose momentum. They knew that if the opposition could control the narrative in Washington, it could derail everything. "We need to mobilize," Ravi said to Ava as they sat in a war room filled with maps, data, and projections. "We need to make sure the public knows what's at stake, and we need to put pressure on lawmakers." "We can't just react to them," Ava responded. "We need to drive the conversation. We need to make people feel that the world they want is within their grasp." The plan was set into motion. Ava reached out to the world's leading influencers and social media activists, organizing a massive global rally to take place in every major city. They called it the Global Earth Strike, a day where millions of people would take to the streets to show their unwavering support for a clean energy future. "We'll show them what the future looks like," Ava said with determination. "We're not just asking for change, we're demanding it." The day of the Global Earth Strike arrived, and the world had never seen anything like it. Across every continent, from the streets of New York City to the beaches of Sydney, From the markets of Mumbai to the parks of Paris, people gathered in their tens of millions. Signs emblazoned with messages of hope and urgency filled the streets. The future is green. Renewable energy now. For our children. The chants rang out, unified, fierce, and unwavering. In the United States, the rally was especially powerful. Young and old, from every walk of life, marched to the Capitol building in Washington, demanding that their elected officials take immediate action to combat climate change and secure a green future. Elon, standing on stage at one of the rallies, addressed the crowd. We're not here just for ourselves. We're here for the future, for the generations yet to come. What we do now will determine the world they inherit. And together, we can make sure it's a world that thrives, that lives, that grows. The crowd erupted into applause, chanting his name. For the first time in history, it wasn't just politicians who were calling for change. It was the people, united in a shared vision for a cleaner, better world. Back in Washington, the pressure was mounting. Lawmakers were feeling the weight of the people's demands, and the Green Earth movement was gaining traction in the media. The fossil fuel lobby, desperate to maintain its stranglehold on the economy, doubled down on its efforts to fight back. The president's phone rang again. It was a prominent senator from a key swing state. We're seeing the writing on the wall, the senator said, his voice low. We've got a choice to make. We can either support the Energy Act and bail out the fossil fuel companies, or we can stand with the people, with the future. But I'm telling you, the pressure is real. We can't ignore what's happening on the streets. Elon sat across from the president, both men aware of the immense pressure they were under. We have the people, Elon said simply. That's all we need. We just need to make sure their voices are heard loud and clear. The battle for the future was entering its most critical phase. In the coming weeks, the momentum of the Green Earth movement reached its zenith. Protests, rallies, and petitions flooded the halls of government. International support for renewable energy surged, and the fossil fuel industry's campaign to convince the public of renewable energy's dangers began to falter. Then, the breakthrough came. A key senator, one who had long been a supporter of the fossil fuel industry, took to the floor of Congress. I've heard the people, the senator said, his voice resolute. They're not just protesting for a clean environment, they're protesting for their future. And it's time that we, the leaders of this nation, recognize that the future is green. The future is renewable. And it's time we put our money where our mouths are. The vote came soon after, and it was a landslide. Congress passed the most ambitious renewable energy bill in history, setting a national goal for net zero emissions within 2 decades, while allocating funds for the development of green energy infrastructure and workforce retraining programs. The news spread like wildfire, and the world celebrated. But Elon, Ava, Ravi, and the team knew that this victory was just one step. The real challenge lay ahead, implementing the green revolution on a global scale, ensuring that no one, no nation, no community, was left behind in the transition. The movement was unstoppable. The future had been secured, but the fight was far from over. As Elon stood in front of a crowd of young activists, he could feel the energy in the air, a collective sense of hope and determination. Together, he said, we've proven that change is possible. But this is just the beginning. The future is ours to create, and we will create it, one step at a time, one action at a time. And with that, the global uprising for a better world, powered by green energy and collective action, moved forward into the next chapter of history. The victory in Washington was monumental, but with great power came new challenges. The world was transitioning to a new era of energy, but not everyone was on the same page. The Green Earth movement had united millions in their fight for a clean future, but now, as the global revolution began to unfold, the world's divisions came to light. From wealthy nations to developing countries, from government leaders to private corporations, the road ahead was anything but smooth. Elon, Ava, Ravi, and the rest of the team knew that the hardest part was just beginning. It wasn't enough to have won the battle in Washington. They needed to ensure that the Green Revolution didn't leave anyone behind. It was time to shift focus and address the growing disparities in how different nations and regions would adapt to the new energy systems. The first sign of trouble came when Elon received a call from his old friend, Dr. Miriam Patel, a renowned climate scientist working in India. Her voice was filled with concern as she spoke. Elon, we have a problem. We've made progress in some areas, but the global push for renewable energy is creating massive divisions here. The disparity between wealthy countries with access to the latest green technologies and developing nations like India, where the need for energy is urgent and basic infrastructure is lacking, is growing wider. Elon leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. How are we going to fix this? We can't let the green revolution become another tool for inequality. Miriam sighed. I know, but it's not just about energy access. It's also about jobs. We're seeing the rise of eco-colonialism in some parts of the world. Wealthy countries are pushing their green technologies on poorer nations without providing adequate support or infrastructure. And the fossil fuel companies are making sure that, where renewable solutions can't be implemented, they still have a foothold. The issue wasn't just about technology, it was about equity. How could the Green Earth movement, with all its promise and hope, ensure that developing nations weren't left behind? How could wealthy nations, which had enjoyed the benefits of fossil fuels for over a century, help fund the transition for poorer countries, where millions still lived without reliable access to electricity? Ava and Ravi dove into the issue, conducting research and working closely with international organizations to identify ways to bridge the gap. They proposed a global energy fund that would pool resources from wealthy countries, multinational corporations, and international organizations to help fund green energy projects in developing nations. Elon, we need to make this a priority, Ava urged. This isn't just about helping the environment. It's about making sure the benefits of green energy are shared equally. If we can't show that this movement benefits everyone, we risk creating a new wave of inequality. Elon nodded, the weight of the challenge settling in. We've got to make sure this is a truly global revolution, not just a Western one. We need to get every country involved, every voice heard. Meanwhile, on the global stage, some nations were already leading the way. Scandinavian countries, along with nations in Western Europe, had adopted ambitious renewable energy policies. They were investing heavily in green technologies, creating jobs, and building the infrastructure needed to support sustainable energy sources. But as nations like Norway, Denmark, and Germany thrived in the Green Revolution, the disparity between these countries and those in the global south became painfully evident. Developing countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Latin America, faced enormous challenges in scaling up green energy technologies. Despite the best intentions of the Green Earth movement, the solutions felt out of reach for many. In Africa, the challenges were even greater. Countries with large rural populations lacked the necessary infrastructure to implement widespread solar or wind power solutions. In Latin America, some countries that were rich in natural resources struggled to balance economic growth with environmental sustainability. As the divide between wealthy and developing nations grew, so did a new form of resistance. This time, it wasn't from fossil fuel companies. It was from the countries that felt abandoned by the green movement. At a major climate summit in Brazil, a heated debate erupted. Representatives from the global south spoke out, accusing the world's wealthiest nations of abandoning them in the rush to adopt green technologies. We have no problem with renewable energy, one delegate from Nigeria declared. But you cannot demand that we make the switch without giving us the tools, the resources, and the time to build a sustainable future for ourselves. You've polluted the world for decades, and now you want us to bear the cost of your mistakes. The world had never been more connected, and never before had the global community been so acutely aware of the challenges and opportunities ahead. The Green Revolution was sweeping across continents, but the stakes had never been so high. With the creation of the Global Green Partnership and the successful implementation of renewable energy projects in developing countries, the movement had gained momentum. Yet, even as progress surged, so did new challenges. At the heart of it all was a looming question. Could the global community maintain this unprecedented level of cooperation? Could humanity continue to move toward a future of sustainable energy, or would the forces of division and greed tear it all apart? It was an early morning in Silicon Valley, and Elon was sitting in his office, looking out at the city below. Despite the massive progress made in the transition to renewable energy, he felt the weight of the task ahead. The Global Green Partnership was a bold initiative, but the road to its success was filled with obstacles. He knew that the transition to a green future wasn't just about clean energy. It was about creating a new world order, one that would be more just, equitable, and sustainable for all. Elon's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Ava. We've just gotten word that the oil industry is pushing a new initiative. They're targeting the Green Earth movement in a more subtle way now. They're trying to frame the renewable energy boom as a tech monopoly, claiming that only tech giants are benefiting from the green transition. They're framing it as a threat to market fairness and democratic values. Elon sighed, knowing that this was inevitable. The fossil fuel industry was no longer in a position to directly stop the green revolution, but they were determined to slow it down, by any means necessary. Later that day, Elon and Ava met with Ravi, Dr. Miriam Patel, and a group of global leaders to discuss the implications of the new pushback from the oil industry. Miriam spoke first, her face etched with concern. They're framing this as a crisis of economic power, she said. They're trying to convince the world that a small group of tech companies are controlling the future of energy. They're claiming that the Green Earth movement is centralizing power in a way that undermines democracy and competition. Elon leaned forward, his mind racing. They're trying to turn the global green transition into a political fight. We can't let them frame this as tech versus people. The future of energy isn't about monopolies. It's about decentralization, empowerment, and collaboration. Ava spoke up, her voice sharp. We need to make sure the world sees the Green Earth movement as a global initiative, not a corporate agenda. We're not just trying to build tech companies. We're trying to build a future for everyone. Ravi nodded. But how do we combat this new narrative? The fossil fuel industry has a deep reach. They've got influence in every sector, and now they're playing the long game, trying to manipulate public perception. Elon stood up, looking out the window again, his mind turning. It's time for us to make the next move. We need to redefine what the green revolution really is. It's not just about energy. It's about jobs. It's about education. It's about leveling the playing field. And so, the Green Earth Coalition was born, a global alliance of governments, corporations, grassroots movements, and educational institutions, all working together to ensure that the green transition was equitable, transparent, and truly global. The coalition's first major initiative was the Global Green Innovation Fund, which would support green startups, local energy projects, and educational programs around the world. It was a direct response to the oil industry's narrative that the green revolution was just a power grab by tech giants. Instead, the coalition focused on grassroots innovation, helping communities, entrepreneurs, and individuals from all over the world bring their green ideas to life. The launch of the fund was met with widespread acclaim, but there were still challenges. Some countries, particularly those with heavy ties to the fossil fuel industry, continued to resist the green transition. In some places, the push for renewables was seen as an existential threat to their economies and way of life. In the United States, a large political faction, backed by powerful oil lobbies, began to accuse the Green Earth movement of being too idealistic, too disruptive. They argued that the transition to renewable energy needed to be gradual, that fossil fuel jobs were still vital to the economy, and that the Green Earth movement was moving too quickly, leaving millions behind. Ava responded to these criticisms head-on. We're not asking for a disruption. We're asking for a transformation. The green revolution will create jobs, economic growth, and a future for everyone. But we can't keep waiting for the perfect moment. We have to act now. Meanwhile, across the world, countries like China, Brazil, and India were beginning to take matters into their own hands. While they still struggled with the logistics of widespread renewable energy adoption, their leaders understood the potential of green energy as a tool for national growth and global leadership. In China, a new government initiative was announced, the Green Infrastructure Belt, which aimed to install solar panels, wind turbines, and energy storage systems across the country's vast rural areas. The project promised to create millions of new jobs and help elevate China's global standing as a leader in clean energy technology. In India, the government had partnered with local communities to create the world's largest solar grid, a project that would bring affordable, clean energy to millions of people who had never had reliable access to electricity. The world was changing, and rapidly. Despite the progress, Elon knew that the future was still uncertain. The fossil fuel industry had been dealt a serious blow, But it was not dead. It had merely retreated, repositioning itself in the new green world order. The challenge now was to prevent the forces of greed and division from sabotaging the transition. And as Elon gazed out at the world, at the countless energy systems being built, the people coming together to demand change, he knew one thing for certain. The green revolution was inevitable. The question was no longer if the world would transition to renewable energy, but how quickly and fairly it would happen. In the distance, Elon could almost hear the sound of the world turning. It was the sound of a new world being born, a world where energy wasn't just a commodity, but a fundamental right for all. The Green Earth movement had come a long way. From a hopeful vision to a global reality, the world had embarked on a bold new path toward a sustainable future. And yet, as with all great revolutions, the fight for a better tomorrow was never without its challenges. The green transition was still a work in progress, but the momentum was undeniable. The question now was, what kind of world would emerge from the ashes of the old one? Would the green revolution be enough to heal the deep divisions that had plagued the planet for so long? Would the forces of greed and division, which had fueled the destruction of the planet, still have the power to derail the progress? It was a bright spring morning in Washington, D.C. The streets were filled with a buzz of anticipation. Today was the day. After years of planning, negotiating, and overcoming countless obstacles, the World Green Summit was about to take place. Leaders, innovators, activists, and citizens from around the world had gathered to chart the future of global sustainability. Elon stood at the podium, looking out over the vast crowd in front of him. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. This moment represented everything he had worked for, a culmination of decades of effort, sacrifice, and vision. But there was still so much to be done. The world was at a crossroads, and it was up to them to decide what kind of future they would create. The opening ceremony of the summit began with a powerful speech from Ava, who had become the public face of the Green Earth movement. Her words rang out with conviction and hope. "We stand here today at the dawn of a new era," Ava said, her voice steady. "An era where the future of our planet is no longer dictated by fossil fuels, greed, or power. We have the opportunity to build a world that is sustainable, equitable, and just. But this is not the work of one person, one nation, or one company. It is the work of all of us, every single person on this planet." The crowd erupted in applause. But Ava wasn't done. "We are here today to reaffirm our commitment to the Green Earth movement, to ensure that our revolution is not just about technology, but about people, about communities, about justice, and above all, about hope." The applause grew louder, but Ava's words were still ringing in the air. The summit was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Leaders from every corner of the globe came together to discuss the future of energy, climate change, and global cooperation. The agenda was packed with bold initiatives: solar power grids in Africa, green infrastructure projects in Asia, education and training programs for the next generation of green innovators, and international agreements that would ensure that no nation would be left behind in the green transition. But the most important moment of the summit came when Elon took the stage. His voice, always calm but authoritative, carried a sense of both resolve and optimism. "We have achieved something extraordinary. We've proven that a better future is possible, one that is powered by clean energy and sustainable systems. But today, I stand before you not to celebrate our achievements, but to call on each of you to be the change we seek. We have won battles, but the war is far from over." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "It is up to us to ensure that this movement, this revolution, is not just about the technology we build, but about the world we create. We must be leaders in more than just energy. We must be leaders in justice, in equality, in opportunity for all." In the days that followed, the summit saw unprecedented levels of global collaboration. Agreements were signed. Commitments were made. A new global framework for energy and sustainability was set in motion. For the first time in history, it seemed as though the world's leaders were united by a common purpose. But as the summit drew to a close, Elon found himself reflecting on the true nature of the Green Revolution. It was not a revolution of technology, it was a revolution of values. The true measure of success wouldn't be the number of solar panels installed, or the amount of CO2 reduced, but the transformation of society itself. The Green Earth movement had shown that it was possible to build a sustainable future, but the real challenge was making that future accessible to everyone. The power to change the world had always been in the hands of the people. Back in Silicon Valley, as the team gathered for their final debriefing, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. The Green Revolution was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. Ravi spoke first, his voice filled with pride. "We did it, Elon. We've created a movement that will change the world forever." Ava nodded. "But this is just the beginning. The real work starts now. We need to make sure the benefits of green energy reach every corner of the globe. And we need to make sure that this movement stays true to its values: equality, opportunity, and justice for all." Elon smiled. "The future is bright. But we're not done yet. There's still much to be done. The world is changing, and we have to keep pushing forward." The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in history, the world had a clear path forward. The Green Revolution wasn't just about the technology. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of their circumstances, could live sustainably and equitably. It was about building a future where the environment and the people who lived on it were treated with the respect they deserved. As the sun set over Silicon Valley, Elon looked out at the horizon, knowing that the work ahead would be the greatest challenge of his life. But it was also the most important. The Green Revolution was here to stay, and it would change everything. Years later, the world had changed beyond recognition. The Green Earth movement had sparked a global renaissance. Solar farms, wind turbines, and clean energy solutions had replaced fossil fuel plants in every part of the world. Energy was no longer a commodity owned by a few. It was a right for all. Elon, now in his 80s, stood in front of the headquarters of the Green Earth Coalition, a monument to what had been achieved. He smiled, knowing that the revolution had succeeded. It wasn't just about building a new world. It was about building a new mindset. A mindset of collaboration, of progress, of sustainability. And as he looked up at the green energy grid stretching across the city, Elon knew that the next generation would take the baton and continue the journey. The future was here, and it was green.